Mungu nguvu yetu.
Silete baraka kwetu, tumikiwe na mlinzi, tukae na udugu, amani na uhuru, na tupate na ustawi.
Very, very good evening. Welcome to the space. My name is Likian Eli, and this is Mizani 254, where the scales of balance are restored and meaningful conversation do thrive. We welcome you to yet another great evening as we discuss matters of importance to this nation. We'll be hosting this conversation with my good friend and colleague, Obet Oriku, as we bring you very seasoned speakers and men and women who believe in the Constitution 2010. So, the question that we are seeking to address tonight is the making of the Constitution. Many have discussed and said that the Constitution 2010 is a copy paste of other jurisdiction. Is that a fact? We find out today. But in the meantime, let me welcome Obed to open the floor. Good evening, Obed. I hope you're doing well.
Good evening, Eli. Thank you. I hope everyone enjoyed the extended Mashujadi because it happened yesterday. And this one is a very important conversation, and I'm grateful to Dr. Ikuro Kot for agreeing to do this alongside with Westin and Professor Akech. I wish to welcome everyone. This is a learning opportunity. We need to understand, we always say that we have the most progressive constitution. And I think we're so lucky to have within us, people who took time to go through the process and understand what it took to make this constitution, or midwife did, and ensure that it became what it is today. So for me, it's a learning opportunity. I'll only probably ask questions for clarification, but I look forward to learning a lot more. And it is important to note that part of what has brought us here is because of we've had people who are senior counsel in this country misrepresenting and misinterpreting the Constitution, either intentionally or deliberately for their own informed reasons. But all the same, I wish to welcome everyone. Thank you, Dr. and thank you, Prof, for honoring this invitation. And let's listen to what you have. And I look forward to this. Thank you, Mizani. Back to you.
Indeed, Obed, we're looking forward to this talk. I want to welcome the real Joe to make his opening remarks. The real Joe, good evening.
Good evening, Mizani. Good evening, Obeds, and all the other listeners and speakers who have just joined us. I am really eager to have the conversation today. I'm so happy that we want to discuss our constitution, which is actually the supreme law of the land. And it is important to, like Dr. said in the previous space, to debunk a few issues surrounding the constitution and things like that. I am glad and eager to learn a lot. And one of those things that we've said a lot of times about our constitution, it is the most progressive in the continent. I wish to know how progressive it is. Thank you, Mezani. Back to you.
I like that, Joe. You talk about it being a very progressive document, and it was. I think it's common knowledge that today one of the reasons we are having this big talk is because of the impeachment motion that has been happening. But that on the side, there also have been claims that the constitution is actually not responsive to today's need. There were people and political players who suggest we need to change the constitution in order to address our new realities. But we are happy to have a man and a gentleman who was part and parcel of the committee of experts that birthed this constitution. And I know there has been also conversation that it is not really what we had intended to come up with. There was some alteration that came in between. And therefore, we ended up with a document that we could say a compromise document, but for the better of this country. I don't know if that's the situation. So this is what we're going to do tonight. all our three speakers have the first 10 minutes to make their initial submissions, but separated the first 2 minutes. They'll greet us and tell us about themselves for those who don't know them. And then the next 8 minutes, they'll spend it trying to expound and give us their view of this constitution before we can go to the nitty gritty of making of the Constitution 2010. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again. My name is Likuyani Eli, and this is Mizani 254. We start off with you, Daktari Ekuro Quote. Welcome to the conversation. I hope you're doing well.
Thanks, Eli, and thanks everyone for this opportunity. So I don't know. You said I need to introduce myself.
Well, looks like people don't know this son of the soil.
Okay. So my name's Ekuru Aukot. I'm an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. I was in the. I'm a practicing advocate. I actually run a law firm, a practice called EA Law Consulting, and Professor Kechi Migai and I one time were partners in a law firm called EKN. Before we all went different ways. He went into a full academia, while I went regionally, trying to work on constitutions. But yeah, we're all back now, and yeah, so I run a legal practice, EA Law Consulting, and of course, I was in the team of and the committee of experts that made the current 2010 constitution. I was the CEO of the committee of experts, and also a member of the committee itself. So in a nutshell, I'll say that's who I am.
Awesome. Great to have you here. And Dr. We are hoping to learn more. Tonight is a learning curve for all of us. Thank you for making time. We also have Professor Migaya Cage. Professor Migaya Cage happens to be a very interesting professor. He gave his inaugural speech. And to those who haven't had an opportunity to listen to it, I bet you don't know what you've missed out. But then again, why talk about the speech if the speech person is here? Professor Migai, the floor is yours. Karibu.
Thank you, Mizani. Thank you, Obed. Thank you, Ekuru, or as we call him, Akuru Mokut. Ekuru, you know what that means?
Yes, I'm told it's a dove. When the dove, I think, was it in Imefura? What do you call it?
Yes.
Yes,
Ekuru has been.
So when Turkana becomes too hot for me, I can relocate it to Luo Nyanza and become a Kuru Mokwach.
Please.
Professor, do we still have you? Are you still in the village? Last time we checked. All right, Obez, I think we've lost Prof. Migai, but we also have Weston with us. Weston, greetings to you. I hope you are doing well. This floor today it's full of doctors. Dr. Weston, good evening. How are you doing?
Hi, Mizani. I'm doing well, and you?
We are fine. We don't know if you are here to treat us, but if it's about the Constitution, we are willing to learn.
Fantastic. Great pleasure for the invite and for this forum. Looking forward also to learn a lot.
Saying a lot of things that don't make sense. So hopefully, and Ekuru and I are educators, so it's always a pleasure sharing with fellow Kenyans. So it's my pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
Sorry, Prof, you came back. I think we lost you for some time, then you came back. So maybe it's a network problem. We allow you to retake that because we had the last bit of the conversation. So if you don't mind, just an introduction, and then we go to Weston.
Just saying briefly that it's my pleasure. Academic for 26 years now. I work on constitutional law and administrative law. I built a career on administrative law, which is really applied constitutional law. And I've also worked as a governance expert at the African Union, the African Peer Review Mechanism, where I spent a lot of time traveling across the continent doing governance assessment. So Africa is a continent I understand very well. Yes, Kenya is one of the progressive societies, thankfully. But I think right now we're in danger of a retrogression. So we must be very alert to ensure that we don't take 3 steps back. Let me stop there for now.
Thank you very much, Prof. And we do hope that those gentlemen interfering with your connection will extend you some latitude this evening.
I am wondering on because the internet connection is pretty good. I don't know what is going on.
You know you've been doing all the wrong things, right? Calling out stupidity. It's not something we do in Africa. All right, that is Professor Migaya Kech, University of Nairobi.
What I wanted to say is that we did, you see, people have been talking about, some of those people have been talking about the standing orders, right? You can hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Ekuru and I draft set of the standing orders for both Parliament, for both the National Assembly and the Senate in 2012.
Interesting.
In other words, we understand them.
Interesting. We'll get to the meat of that.
We wrote them. We understand them.
All right. Great to hear that you wrote these standing orders and people have no clue about this. But let's cross over to Western. Dr. Western Shilao joining us from the ASA Joburg. Thank you for making time to be here. Greetings to you. Kindly give us a brief introduction, what you do, and why this conversation is important to you. Western.
Thank you so much, Mizani. Western Shilao is my name. I prefer just Western, that suffices. Kenyan, somebody who's interested in the rule of law, justice, democracy, and those kind of things. I'm a teacher. I've taught in Kenya, currently plying out my craft in down south. That is it. Thank you. And this topic is important because we have to dialogue, we have to talk. If we don't talk, then we plunge into the abyss. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have enough teachers in the room. We also have enough students in the room. You will do us one favor. Send your questions in the chat section. But before we can actually commence with the meat of this talk, I have with me Obeds. Obeds, I saw your hand was up. I don't know what's the problem from your end.
There is no problem. Just drawing your attention to the fact that we've got Agostino Neto on the space as well. I'm sure he has a passion for the Constitution, and probably if he'd like to contribute, let him feel free to be part of this conversation. However, we'll allow Professor and Daktari and Western to canvass their issues. So we'll start with Daktari, taking his 8 other minutes that he has to make his introduction, and then we go to Prof, then followed by Western. I hope that's correct.
Yes,
Mizani?
that's what we're going to do. But before we can have Daktari lay out the carpet, because this started off as a question that Western laid out. Why did we copy paste the American? Rather, it was a presentation that Kenya, we pride ourselves, yet we copy pasted the American Constitution. However, looking at the making of the Constitution, it's not a journey that started today. Many dated back to when we had the Independence Constitution, but I'll allow Joe to bring us up to speed and then introduce Daktari to pick it up from there. Joe, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much, Mizani. I don't know whether I'm seeing it correctly, but I'm seeing someone try to get our attention. Justice for all at the speakers panel. I don't know whether you would allow me
right now. Right now, we will get first to our main speakers, real, and then we'll get to them in a few. But please go ahead and open up the floor. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I stand guided. So basically, our constitution, the process of coming up with our constitution, what we have now as the constitution, I don't know what everyone else thinks, but I feel that this process began immediately after independence with our independence constitution in '63, and the process has been progressive. This is in my own thinking because I'm looking at the entire process from 1963 coming towards and what really, because we say a lot of times that the constitution is the supreme law of the land. As well, we also say that the constitution is the rule by the people, for the people, and if that is the case, then the people decide what really matters to them in terms of law. So looking at our constitution from 63 coming downwards to now the 2010, what we have as the 2010 constitution, and the one that we pride ourselves to being very progressive, I see a lot of changes. And this is where the Daktari is going to come in, and Migai as well. I see a lot of changes along the way, and each and every change is informed by something. And we've discussed this probably yesterday in our space. And most of this, I feel, is informed by what is, I would think, the political situation at the moment. I mean, looking at why Moi then turns our country into a single party state, what informed that decision, and things like that. But I'm here again to learn. You said we are students today. I wish not to say more. I prefer to give you the mic so that you can introduce Daktari, so that Daktari can take us through his 8 minutes of time. So what I would just urge our speakers, we try and observe some time discipline. We have a lot to discuss today. I wish we stick to the guidelines as per the timings given to us by the speaker, the co-host, and the hosting team. Thank you very much, Eli. Back to you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first session. We are humbled to have Daktari Aukot to give us his opening detail of the conversation around the making of the Constitution 2010. And then again, we'll have him at a second session. Daktari, the mic is yours.
Oh, thanks everyone. So I'll go straight to what I call general observation on constitution building processes or constitution making processes. And these are some of the issues that the committee of experts considered in attempting to finalize the constitution. You recall that, and let me just state for upfront that the independence constitution was not actually written in Kenya. It was written in the Lancaster House Conference somewhere in London with some delegates who went there to purportedly represent the people of Kenya. So it wasn't really a constitution that came from within us. So it was written for us. And that's part of the reason why it underwent several amendments, I know. And then, of course, ended up with the agitation for repeal of Section 2A of the Constitution in 1992 that ushered in multi-party democracy. Then from 2000 to 2005, we had the CKRC, the Constitution of Kenya Review Commission, which was chaired by Yash Pal Gai. People like Professor Lumumba participated in it as the secretaries or to that commission, and it ended up in a referendum in 2005, which of course Kenyans rejected that constitution. And then of course there came the post-election violence in 2007, 2008, and of course the agenda 4 institutions were put in place, and that included constitution making, matters land, matters boundaries, matters election, and then of course the committee of experts was put in place in 2009. But as an introduction, I'd like to say that when we sat down to now think about a new constitution for Kenya, we asked ourselves, we confronted a couple of issues. Number one, we came to the reality that there was an elite capture of the state. So that constitution building process is real, because this elite capture of the state controlled everything. So the political class always eloquently spoke of change, but they didn't really believe in that change, and they don't want it. So the question then really for us was, do they really need a new constitution? And we used to joke in the committee of experts saying that if we are failing to use just the Quran, the Torah, the Bible, the 10 Commandments, then why are we writing ourselves a new constitution? So that was point number one, the elite capture of the state. And I think we can see that already now re-emerging again. The second question that we saw for ourselves was that the constitution building process is actually a regional concern. If you look at the last 20 plus years, it has been agitation for change towards a people-friendly constitutions and a responsive governments in Africa. So the question became, are we living constitutionalism or constitutionality?
Did we lose Dr. Aukot?
Seems like we lost Daktari. I don't know whether Ella, you can hear Daktari.
I can't get him.
I can hear you very
Daktari, are
clearly.
you back?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I think we had lost you. Probably received a call, but kindly pick up from the constitutionalism issue.
Yeah, so I was saying that for a long time we've been struggling as a country with the two notions of constitutionalism and constitutionality. Constitutionalism being basically has living the culture of constitution, believing in our constitution, the letter and the spirit of it. But for a long time, we focus so much on constitutionality, the mere passage of laws. We pass laws, we pass constitutions, but we don't really believe in them. Am I clear so far?
Yes, we can hear you, Daktari.
So
Proceed.
the third introductory point I want to make is that there is really no perfect constitution in the world. But what you need to do is to have a proper design and plan, which will get you somewhere. In any constitution in the world, like ours, there has to be acceptable, irreducible minimums. For example, checks and balances is something that you will see in all constitutions in the world. Like yesterday, I told you, just have a look at constitute.org, that website, and you'll find about 192 constitutions. So that for us at the Committee of Experts, the new irreducible minimum for us was how do we arrive to a generally acceptable constitution? And we wanted to emphasize the idea of ownership of this constitution. That's why we went around the country asking for views from Kenyans, what they want. And I'll speak about some of those contentious issues. Then the fourth point I want to bring is that public people's participation is a must-have ingredient in constitution making. There is no shortcut about it. So that today you will see power as now shifting to the people as opposed to just the leadership of a country. The fifth point, by way of introduction, is that a constitution making project is actually an important national dialogue. It seeks to address the sticky issues in a country. In our case, after the 2007-2008 post-election violence, we were addressing all those issues you saw there, what is called the Agenda 4 issues, Agenda 4 institution. We had the National Cohesion and Integration Commission, boundaries, matters electoral, matters constitution, youth, land, and all those. So it became a very national dialogue. So sixth point, just by own introduction, is to say that there are a lot of similarities in all countries in the making of a constitution. And perhaps this is where Weston was saying there is a cut and paste in our constitution. I don't know why he was comparing with America. I really would like to hear that. So just in a nutshell, that is what I can say by way of introduction. But the point that the Committee of Experts emphasized before I go to the real thing is that there must be an agreement to change the current constitution at that time. And the second thing that we needed to do was to come up with a design of the process, which was very paramount for us, because designing the process properly gives a formula for completion. We talked of timelines, and we identified various tasks. We redressed some of the concerns and challenges. And for example, how to streamline parallel processes. For example, that time we had the reconciliation, boundaries and all that. So the idea was, how do we realign all these issues into the constitution making process? Now, having said that, we at the Committee of Experts did a lot of background reflection. And some thoughts actually came to our mind when we committed ourselves. We must get this constitution so that we end up this almost 20 plus year of looking for the constitution. So the first thing that we wanted to do was we needed to find a winning formula in completing the constitution. And therefore, the danger, of course, of going to the people was that the constitution was reduced into a shopping list of all that everybody wanted. And we needed to confront fear for change, because in making a constitution, you're actually making tremendous change in terms of the system of governance, institutions. So there was a question about, do Kenyans actually want this change? But most importantly for us, because we came from the colonial to the post-independence constitution, a fundamental question we asked ourselves: How do we tame the executive in a constitution-making reform process? Now, what was the process itself? Which process did we follow as the committee of experts? We recognized.
So, Dr. I think your minutes are out.
Okay.
However, we can come on the second part of those issues you said you were able to identify, and then try and extend more so that we allow the other speakers to also make their opener on the same,
Okay.
if that works for you.
Fair enough.
Please
fair enough.
put a pin on that. Thank you. Quite extensive there, I must say. And I'm also learning. Tonight, we are all students except the experts. Let's find out, what does Professor Migai thinks about the whole thing of coming up with the 2010 Constitution. Did we get the shopping list right? Professor, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Mizani. So the Ekuru has outlined the from 1963. So I think if you look at the period of the 90s, the period of the 90s has been said to be the period where we thought we'd have in African countries, that means the sub-Saharan Africa, the so-called sub-Saharan African countries, the third liberation. The third liberation was about constitutionalism. And this is around the early 90s when there was a lot of people are reacting to the very repressive imperial state. And so all over the continent, there was a clamor for constitutional reforms. Ours started around the late 80s, and eventually President Moi was forced to concede to constitutional reforms. Of course, he tried to manipulate it. Him and the KANU government then really tried to manipulate it. Incidentally, with the help of people like Raila Odinga. And real change began around 1997. And people like Mutunga, Professor Kibwana were at the forefront of this, and so started a process. So there were two parallel processes around the late 90s. There was one that was led by civil society, and then Moi, of course, came up with his. And civil society said, we are not participating in this. And so unless you recall, we want to do a civil society. And that is when they settled on Yashpal Gai, Professor Gai, as to join, to bring together the two groups. And that is what then brought together the beginnings of the Constitution of Kenya Review Commission. This is around 1999, 2000. So CKRC then gets formed, and it is towards the end of the Moi regime. And so CKRC begins its work with the guy at the helm, and the process begins at the grassroots. So you had, it was a very people-driven process. I mean, I wrote a brief. Those of you who may know, for the BBI case, I wrote a brief on the history of the making of the Constitution of 2010. I wrote a brief. I think it's all over the place. If you read it, I am happy to share it with you. So there were some elements of elitism. There were some elements of real meaningful public participation. And so there were delegates from the grassroots that formed the Constitution of Kenya Review Commission. But also the members of parliament insisted on being delegates at CKRC. And that was the beginning of problems, because this was also towards the end of the Moi regime. So the Moi regime is ending. Kibaki is elected in 2002, Kibaki promises a constitution within 100 days. And then the Kibaki people get into power and they say, the problem was Moi. We are not the problem. Why are we changing our constitution? So they renege on the promise of giving us a constitution in 100 days. And at the same time, they've shafted Raila Odinga and his, I think, NDP then, because they had promised to create a prime ministerial position for Raila Odinga. They don't do it. So there's a lot of fighting. Bomas is disbanded at some point. What's his name? The Reverend, what's his name? Njoya goes to court and the Yellow Movement, and they stop the process, and we're told there be a constituent assembly. So the process is stopped at that point. They go back, they produce so Bomas had produced a draft. This draft was the Kibaki people like Kiraitu Murungi ensured that it did not see the light of day. Then some court processes followed. In 2005, there's an attempt by the parliamentarians to come together. They produce the Waki draft in. This is then taken to a referendum. The people reject the Waki draft. Kibaki gets rid of Raila Odinga and his NDP people. The post-election violence follows, and then we feel, okay, now this is a constitutional moment. And then we bring Ekuru and his team on board, saying, this committee of experts, please look at what the RC did. Can you give us? Can you resolve the contentious issues? Contentious issues were basically three. Ekuru, it was devolution, it was the executive, and it was the Senate. I believe Ekuru can correct me. So then we give we create a new framework, and we tell Ekuru and his team, please resolve these contentious issues, talk to the people, and Ekuru then and his people then come up with a harmonized draft, which is taken to Naivasha. Part of it is bastardized in the CKRC. We'd say, let's have a parliamentary system of something of that sort. But Raila and his team change their minds, and we end up with a presidential system of government. So that is where we are in a nutshell. I hope I've captured the history in 5 minutes.
You know, Prof, I want to sign up for your
Back
class.
to you.
Yes, thank you, Prof. I hope you can hear me, and thank you so much for trying to capture this in the historical perspective and just minimizing it. Now, that said, I hear there are issues we wanted to address with the Constitution. At the same time, to the best of my knowledge, right now, from what I'm gathering, is we actually wanted to solve individual problems, especially political ones. Probably I'm just elaborating the point, but let's hear from Western. Western, greetings to you. The making of the Constitution. 8 minutes.
Greetings to you, Eli. Good. Just as my fellow panelists have shared with us, this process of constitution making has been protracted, been bloody, interpassed with the tears and pain, broken bones, and such, until where we are. For one thing is clear, the Kenyan political elite, since 63 to date, have been averse to the rule of law, have been averse to the constitution, such that under Kenyatta 1, the constitution that was there, the independent constitution, was arbitrarily amended to create an imperial president. The same culture continued under Daniel Moi, with the entrenchment into the law of the one-party state. And even under Kibaki, as you've heard, Kibaki in the opposition was very lyrical about the need for a new constitution. Kibaki in power reneged on that promise. BBI in the recent past, an attempt to mutilate this 2010 constitution. So what it means that the Kenyan political elite is not invested in the rule of law. This constitution is a distraction. And when it constitutes a rampart along their way, They always come up with ingenious ways of going around it, which has created an illiberal democracy. Well, we have got the constitution, very lofty provisions, but this country, the state, the society remains extensively liberal. That we can quote the constitution, but when it comes to living these civil liberties, respecting these civil liberties, uh, demonstrating that indeed we are a country, society anchored on human rights, we really fall short. And that brings us to what is it that we can pick as some of the pillars of this constitution, much as we must point out, and the Kuro Court is here can attest to that, the constitution that we have was watered down by the political elite when they were handed the draft. One of the things they did was to delete, for instance, entirely a provision on culture, language, and regulation of political campaigning. They completely did away with that. And you can imagine what constitution do you have when you have no regard for the people's cultures, the people's languages, and such kind of a thing. What becomes the anchor of that constitution? What is it that the people can cite in that constitution as quintessentially theirs? Which why last time I told Ekura Court that the politics has always undermined our quest for constitutionalism, and we cannot overlook that. One of the other provisions they deleted entirely was the provision to vet judges afresh, because under Moi, the judiciary had been captured and people used to make rulings and judgments unashamedly based on political considerations. The political elite deleted that provision such that they made very liberal and far-reaching changes on the draft that they were handed. And the Okuro Court can confirm the committee of experts was warned that they should not change a comma, should not change a full stop. They should pass that draft as it is because it was an outcome of political deal making. Which brings me to the issue of copy and paste. It wasn't copy and paste. I had responded to Ekura Court when he made the suggestion that we could borrow from the United States of America vis-a-vis, say, the presidential candidates or such kind of people not holding party positions, or members of the cabinet, as in our case, not at the same time holding party positions or being members of parliament. But I ask, it's easier to borrow from the US that this is what they are doing, but much, much harder, if not almost impossible, to borrow their culture. And we see it here. So-called technocrats in the cabinet, but they play politics, partisan politics. They're on the stump all the time, addressing barazas and that kind of thing, the kind of deviancy that this constitution was meant to cure. So brings us to the context in which we're discussing this matter. This 2010 constitution affirms certain salient aspects that were not there in the previous constitution. The aspect of the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights was subsidiary, if not non-existent, in the previous constitution. Here, this constitution affirms the Bill of Rights. But as we've said time and again, the constitution is only as good as the society in which it's supposed to operate. It's only as good as the political elite, the government functionaries who are supposed to implement this constitution, the judiciary that is expected to interpret and adjudicate the kind of disputes that arise within the society. And as it were, the 2010 constitution is battling to find traction as far as Kenya is concerned, because it's forced to operate in a political terrain that is extremely very unstable. Because if you read other constitution, and I go back to the basis, that the politics has always informed some of those provisions in the constitution and continues to inform how we go about this constitution. It affirms that Kenya is an ethnical society. That diversity about ethnicity, that diversity about language, that diversity about religion, those things paramount as far as this constitution is concerned. And therefore, our inability to affirm and respect our diversity, which brings us to the kind of politics that immediate deputy president found himself in, ethnic balkanization. This constitution was meant to put a stop that kind of political culture. But as we see, that is far from being achieved, realized. Why? Because old habits die hard. And therefore, I think as I learned, we have to celebrate aspects like integrity and leadership. We have to celebrate aspects like social, economic, political, civil rights. But the question is as to whether the people of Kenya, especially those who do not have the means, those who do not have power, can actually enjoy the many fruits and benefits that this constitution promises. And that places the onus of making sure that these lofty promises and provisions find expression in Kenyans' lives on the shoulders of the political elite. And unfortunately, they do not have what it takes to breathe life into this constitution. So it behoves us, the people of Kenya, to relentlessly pile pressure on these people, for no political elite anywhere in the world acts altruistically until the people make them predict the consequences of not adhering to the rule of law. Thank you. I land.
Thank you very much. And on the first round, I must commend the speakers. They have been keeping their time, and that means we are on the right trajectory. Once again, for those who are joining in, we are discussing the making of the Kenya Constitution 2010. How did we arrive at that very progressive document? Have we been able to live even half of that dream that has been scripted in that document? And we initially had Dr. Ekuru Aukot, who was submitting to us, coming from that very authoritative position, having served in that committee of experts. He is the right brains to question some of the issues we are raising tonight. So, Dr. Aukot, I come back to you. You were talking about taming government and some of the issues you wanted to address in the previous constitution and administration. The mic is yours. I'll give you an extra 5 minutes to either complete that submission, and thereafter we progress to the next level. Dr. Aukot.
Thanks so much, Obed, Eli. I think for me, first of all, let me make some quick correction after listening to Western. The chapter, the Bill of Rights is clear about language and culture, and that you will see in Article 44 of the Constitution. And it's very explicit that every person has the right to use the language and participate in the cultural life of the person's choice. So it's not true that the politicians, watered down what we as the committee of experts had written. Of course, we were not forced. In fact, I think if you allow me, Eli and Mizani, I think I wished, let me remind Kenyans, how this process came about. But secondly, I also just want to correct early that if you look at the sixth schedule, Western rather, the sixth schedule to our constitution, section 23 speaks about judges, the vetting of judges and magistrates. I think the only thing I will agree with to some extent with him is that this vetting of judges and magistrates ought to have been a continuous process. Last year, when I went to speak at the judges colloquium in Mombasa, and I posed this question to them when we're talking about political authority, judicial authority. And I asked them, you are an arm of government called the judiciary. The two arms of government, that the legislature, parliament, and the executive, are vetted every 5 years. Why can't we also vet you every 5 years? Because you're also the other arm of government. There were divided views on that. And I think some judges said, yes, we need to be vetted regularly because some of our members are actually embarrassed us. But Mizani, Obed, and Eli, allow me to just walk you guys through quickly the Constitution of Kenya Review Act of 2008, just in a snapshot, because it is important you understand what was the framework of actually making this constitution, if that's okay.
Kindly proceed. That was your main job tonight.
Exactly. So if you look at the Constitution of Kenya Review Act, it had various stages. The way our process was, I talked earlier on about the design of the constitution making process. It was designed in the Constitution of Kenya Review Act. The act was enacted on the 4th of November 2008. received presidential assent on the 11th of December 2008. That was stage one. In stage two was the commencement of the act. That is 14 days after assent by publication in the Kenya Gazette. That was 22nd December 2008. And one of the things that you must admire about our constitution making process, it had timelines. It was basically a plane that must take off or it must crash. And you'll see that in section 1 and section 28. So then there was a Statute Law Miscellaneous Amendment Act of 2009, which was actually the work of the Committee of Experts. Because when we identified there were gaps in the Review Act, we actually introduced timelines as well. And that culminated into the State Law Miscellaneous Amendment Act of 2009. And that is the establishment of PSC, Parliament Select Committee, on the review of the Constitution. Now, stage 3 was the appointment of the Committee of Experts themselves. And there was actually a timeline. By 8th of January 2009, that committee had to be appointed. Then there was stage 3, which was the establishment of the Committee of Experts, who were actually the drivers of the process. By the way, we overruled many of the things that the Parliament Select Committee did. For example, we had proposed that Senate be a upper house with veto power. They went to Naivasha and called it a lower house. We said, hell no, there is no such thing. So you will see that in that establishment of the Committee of Experts, there were timelines when the advertisements must happen, 21 days. Again, I don't want to bore you with that, but you must read this for yourself. Then there was stage 4, the process of review itself. What was that process? That process is described in section 23, generally and specifically on, like Professor Migai has actually said, identification of contentious.
Dr. Quat, I don't read you. Are you still with us?
Can't hear him as well.
And I can,
Yeah, okay. Can hear.
I can hear you very clearly. Can you hear,
Now
me
we
now?
can.
You're back. Kindly proceed.
So I was saying there was the stage 4, which was the process of review itself, which is provided for in section 23 of the Constitution. And it talked about general and specific issues. It talked about the need to identify what is contentious issues, as Professor Kechmigai ably said, and non-contentious issues. And then we are required to prepare a report and to draft a harmonized draft constitution, which we published in November of 2009. That was published. It gave Kenyans 30 days to incorporate public. Then it was sent to the PSC, Parliament Select Committee, and the Committee of redrafted based on their comments. Then we presented the same to Parliament, and Parliament submits the same to the AG. Now, stage 5 was the referendum and the promulgation of the new constitution. The Attorney General was required to publish it within 30 days of receipt from Parliament. Then the Committee of Experts facilitated and conducted civic education for 30 days. The question we asked, was 30 days enough? We don't know. But you see, we had been in this process for the longest time, over 20 plus years. Then, of course, the then Independent Interim Electoral Commission of Kenya was to conduct a referendum within 60 days of publication of the bill. And the question then at that time emerged, do we need a referendum? Should a referendum always be divisive? Now, just for the benefit of everybody, there were 4 organs of review, which was specified in Section 5 of the Constitution of Kenya Review Act. The first one was the Committee of Experts. These are the guys who were actually on the driving seat. We are the ones who drafted this constitution. Even when we received your comments, we will debate them in plenary. If we don't like them, we'll disregard them. The second organ of review was the Parliamentary Select Committee, which was then chaired by Abdikadir Hussein, who was the Member of Parliament for Mandera. And this was basically between PNU, Party of National Unity at that time, and ODM. Then there was the National Assembly as another organ of review. Again, the divide here was between PNU and ODM. Then the last organ was the referendum, which is really the people of Kenya. And we went to this constitution with a yes or no. Now, how did we identify the contentious issue? Obed, but you can stop me if I exceed my time. Yeah. How did we identify the contentious issues?
This is what we're going to do, because we want you to bring out the issue of the contentious issues. We're going to give you another 4 minutes and a half, if that works.
Okay, fine. How did we come up with the contentious issues? We considered all documents of the CKRC, that is the Constitution of Kenya Review Commission of 2001 to 2005. We also considered all previous draft documents. We also considered documents that emerged after the Bomas draft and process. That is what's called the National Delegates Conference at Bomas. Number 4, we considered all other relevant circumstances and reports. The post-election violence, the Commission on Implementation of the Investigation on the Post-Election Violence, the Kriegler Report, and many, many others. Then we also considered public views on what they thought was contentious. Then we also took cognizance of the 2005 referendum and the post-election violence and the National Accord. Now, what were the contentious issues? I think already Professor Ketch has spoken about this. The number one contentious issue was the executive and the legislature. In other words, what system of government do we want as Kenyans? That became a contentious issue. The second issue was devolution.
We lost him again. Eli?
Did we get the first contentious issue?
Yes,
We did, but then we lost you a bit.
So the system of government was one of the contentious issues. That's the executive and the legislature. The second one was devolution of powers and services. That is, how far can we devolve? Remember, in the Bomas process, there were 4 levels of government: the national, regional, district, and locational. And in our wisdom, we said, no, this is going to be very expensive for Kenyans. That's why we reduced it to 2. Then the third contentious issue was bringing the constitution into effect. They were already so tired. They wanted this constitution ASAP. But there were other additional issues as well that emerged. Land was one of those issues. The Kadhi courts. And the question is, when does life begin? Vis-a-vis the abortion debate. And this you can read Article 26 of the Constitution. It's very clear that life begins, everybody has the right to life. Life begins at conception. Nobody's life should be taken arbitrarily. Abortion is prohibited unless in the opinion of a medical practitioner. So that became a very contentious issue, especially with evangelicals. Now, how did we resolve the contentious issues? We considered public views. We went through thematic consultations. We had sectoral consultation with political parties, religious groups, civil society, and the private sector. But we also had expert engagement. I remember we brought Professor Ndulo from Zambia to come and speak to us about the executive. Then there was internal discussion and agreements by the committee of experts. And by the way, the committee of experts never voted on any single issue. If you disagreed with your colleagues, convince us, and then we will build consensus. And then, of course, there was consultation with a group called the reference group, which is a group of 30 individuals. So I think that in a nutshell is how we identify the contentious issue. I don't know whether I should go on or because I wanted to speak about what was then the outcome of this constitution making process so that we can demonstrate what we have today is what the people of Kenya told us to do. I don't know whether I can go now or I can pause before I come to that.
probably I will allow you to pause for now, Daktari. You know, as a
Okay.
good doctor, you need to take some water. Otherwise, you might just lose your oxygen. I don't know how true is that. Let's now.
I have a big bottle of water beside me. Don't worry about that.
That is very healthy. You know, unlike my good friend Obeds, he drinks other types of waters, but not the holy one. Big guy,
Why did you go there?
Professor Kesh, I want to come to you. You've listened to Daktari and his submission on some of the issues that we intended to address. And I want to really push it to the next level before we can go to the second hour when we'll open up to the rest of the team. Do you have any specifics that you'd like to address? I will leave it open.
Thank you very much. Mizani, you're a very good diplomat.
You know, Obeds taught me this well.
You're breaking up. Are you hearing me? I can't hear you.
We can hear you, Daktari. Professor, kindly proceed.
Yeah, so the thing to note about constitution making is how do you get the people to really have a say versus the elites. And I think part of the challenge that we've had as a country is that so it was very, very difficult for us to get a constitution because of disagreements among the elites. The people, I think, were very clear on what they wanted, but there were power fights, if you put it that way, among the elites. And it was recognized that we were never a constitution without the input of the elites. And that is why in the Constitution Review Act of 2008, it was felt that we needed to acknowledge the politics, that the power dynamics in our society, and so the preeminent role was given to the Parliamentary Select Committee. But that is also our undoing, because what we ended up doing is getting a settlement that I don't think has worked very well for us as a country, because I think and if you look across Africa, I think parliamentary systems are better for us than the presidential system of government. While we wanted, if you're going back to the Bomas draft, while we wanted, as the people of Kenya, if you're talking about popular views, the people wanted a parliamentary system of government, but somehow we ended up with a presidential system of government. And I mean, my sense of it is that we need to go back to a parliamentary system of government. It will be less oppressive. I think more democratic. But so the point I'm trying to make is that in all of this, even what is going on now, there are always contests between what it is that the people want and what it is that the elites want. And then you ask yourself, democracy, if any of you ever listen to my inaugural lecture, has to account for power dynamics in any society. And if you're accounting for power dynamics in any society, you're asking yourself, who really sets the agenda? If we are the people, truly, if we are the people, if you're talking about democracy as a system of government in which the people, it is a government by the people, for the people, and by the people, then the people should set the agenda, not the elites or just a section of the people setting. And that is where we are. To what extent are we setting the agenda? And when you hear clamors for constitutional change, I think it is alluding to some of these issues, such as, do we really have a system of government that works for us? Recall that one of the contentious issues was the nature of the executive. Did we get it right? Do we go back? Do we have a system of government that we cannot afford, like the Punguza Mzigo movement has been telling us? It seems that way to me. So I think it is something that, as citizens, it is a conversation that we need to have. And as we speak, there is clamor for changing the constitution. It is very elitist. Is it really what the people want? I doubt. Those are the dynamics in terms of constitution making that we always need to be aware of. And constitution making is an ongoing process. You see, you cannot say, the people of the past cannot say that they will rule the future from the grave. We should always contemplate that at some points in time, in future, future generations say that, yes, this is a constitution that you gave us, but it is not good for us. We are the people that live in the present. We want to rewrite the constitution. And that is what we were fighting for. I participated in the BBI cases just to be able to preserve the space or the ability for the people to say that, look, this constitution was made 20 years ago by people then. We did not participate in it. We have to reserve the right to change it. Let me stop there, Mizani.
Thank you, Prof. And that's eloquently put. So we'd allow Weston. Weston, I give you 5 minutes. We need to go back then to Daktari to, after you speak, you go back to Daktari to give what he wanted to speak about before we open the conversation for questions and comments to people that are on the space. Weston?
Thank you so much, Eli. Akuru, I do agree with you. The aspect of language is covered in Article 44, but I think it could have been more detailed, especially in a country that has got a history of colonialism and where kids would be tormented in school and, you know, stigmatized for speaking their mother tongue. We could have gone much deeper than this, because I would like to see departments of African languages in Kenyan universities. You go to Nairobi University, there's a Department of African Languages. You go to any other university in Kenya, we don't have those things. Why? Because we don't think they're important, but they do matter. I would love to see, for instance, if you go to these county governments, if you find like MCS from a particular county can speak same language, they can deliberate their affairs in that language, and that will not be in any way in contravention of the constitution. So I think we've shied away from who we are, from our identity, because of this ethnic politics. We think if we affirm who we are, the languages we speak, and we use them, we are propagating tribalism, which is not actually true. Hiding those things actually is in itself deleterious to our social cohesion. Secondly, I think I get disturbed when I hear we've got the most progressive constitution on the continent. First, I don't know how we arrive at that conclusion, because we do have the political elite that is almost irredeemably rogue. It has got no regard for the constitution, for the rule of law, and at every other turn, it's ever conspiring, colluding on how to water down this constitution. So to what extent? And secondly, the question that Migai is asking, the rank and file, ordinary people, to what extent can we say really they have enjoyed the provisions of this constitution? Because if the constitution does not alter qualitatively the material conditions of ordinary people, if it only serves elite interests, I don't think there's reason to celebrate that constitution. And Ekuru, the thing about, I think it is Migai who is affirming it, the provision about the presidential system and the two-tier government with the introduction of county governments. Well, critics have pointed out that those things were arrived at hurriedly, in a hurry. And the political implications of those, the deals, because it was a deal making in Naivasha, were not well thought through, which why people are asking, how did we come up with these numerous counties in a country that, cannot afford, these cushy lifestyles of these people? Well, that is the albatross that we carry from Naivasha, because of politicians ever being obsessed and preoccupied with what is in it for me, as opposed to what is in it for the ordinary person. Migai, I got my reservations vis-a-vis parliamentary system, much as that is what was recommended. Deliberations at Bomas and subsequently, and the political elite, out of the blue, agreed on the presidential. Well, parliamentary system can be fairly volatile in the sense that if you have to, and we are a country of ethnic minorities. What that means is that no single ethnic group can form a government. So what does it mean? You need coalitions. Now, in the parliamentary system, if a political party that is part of a coalition in parliament thinks that the deal they made before the government was formed has not been honored, well, they can pull the rug from under the feet of the person who is ruling. And that means that government must collapse. And people have to go back to elections. I'm not so sure whether we have what it takes to contend with the seismic kind of situation that arises out of that. So that we don't have IBC now. We think elections should only be held periodically after 5 years. But the instability of parliamentary system would dictate that we be ready for elections at every other given corner. Secondly, how do you cure the bad manners of our politicians? I'm not so sure there's any political system of governance that would cure this deviancy. It can't. We will still see different, problems as far as the parliamentary system is concerned. And the same people will tell us, no, look, we have to go back to the presidential.
Weston, you have a minute
Okay,
to learn.
so I think it's not the system of government. It's not whether parliamentary or presidential. It is, as it were, the moral fiber within which all these things are supposed to be rolled out and implemented. And unless we fix that, we run a risk of groping in the dark for looking for the ideal when the ideal actually doesn't exist. It's only that you have to be practical and respect one another. Thank you.
May I,
Thank you, Weston.
may I respond to that?
Okay, Prof.
This debate,
I give you 2 minutes, then we go back to Dr.
yeah, this debate
so that
of
Dr.
parliamentary systems versus presidential systems. So I've actually done quite a bit of research on this one, and I'm happy to share it. One research I did while at the African Peer Review Mechanism, where we do the APRM in short does produces the African Union's African Governance Report. It's called the AGM, the AGR, the African Governance Report. It's a biennial report. It produced every 2 years. The first one looked at Africa's governance, so you can look at it, you can read it for yourself. Number two, fortunately, in 2022, the whole of 2022, I spent that year in Lesotho, trying to advise them on the reform of their constitution. And Lesotho has been one of the most volatile parliamentary systems to date. But what we came up with was to say that, look, we can ameliorate the volatility of the parliamentary system by restricting the time within which a vote of no confidence can be called. So there are ways to deal with it, but still we felt that between a presidential system and a parliamentary system, the parliamentary system is likely to be more accountable. And I'm happy to share, there's been very interesting comparative literature on this. For us, for divided societies such as ours, I think the feeling is that if you have mechanisms to be able to control the volatility of parliamentary systems, that you can call a vote of no confidence on a prime minister at any time. If you restrict that and say that, look, you must fulfill certain conditions before a vote of no confidence can be held, then you have more stable governments. So the question in Lesotho, how do we have more stable governments? But certainly, I still feel strongly that for divided societies such as ours, and I would invite you also to read the works of Arend Leipert, whose work I love when I teach a course in law and democracy and governance. I think for divided societies such as ours, parliamentary systems are better, but we can ameliorate with their with the volatility by restricting the giving restrictions so that votes of no confidence can't just happen anytime. I hope that makes sense.
Okay, Prof. I think to the ordinary folk like me, it does. But you know, there are those who would feel there are pros and cons about that. I would like to allow Dr. Ekuru to speak. There's something that he posed that he wanted to give, and then we can open it to the others on the space to be able to ask questions or make comments so that we can advance the conversation. Thank you very much. Dr. back to you.
Okay, so I mean, so I just want to say a few things in terms of to demonstrate. When we went around the country after all these identification of issues and all that, what really was the outcome? Were the people's views actually reflected in the text of the Constitution today, the text of the Constitution today? So we asked ourselves a couple of questions. Number one was, how do we want to treat power that is exercised by the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary? It's a question we asked ourselves. And when we asked ourselves this question vis-a-vis the views of the people, we actually ended up with Article 1, where we say that all sovereign power and authority vests in the people to exercise it directly or indirectly through their elected representatives. Now, we have now seen how that article is now being tested in the context of our constitution, because we can now see that the elected representatives are actually failing the people of Kenya. So perhaps there might be need to revisit that article and say, okay, how then can we exercise it directly where the representatives are actually failing us? And of course, the other article related to that question was Article 2, supremacy of the constitution. So the second question we also asked ourselves, among as many others, I'm just picking some randomly for demonstration. How do you decentralize or devolve power and services? So you will see that evidence of that is answered in Article 6 on devolution of services, organs and services to each and every part of the Republic of Kenya, and therefore also Chapter 11 on devolution. The other question we asked ourselves was this. What will be the principles of governance? How should the executive authority be exercised or behave itself? You will see that question answered in Article 10 of our Constitution, where we talk about national values and principles of governance. The other question we asked is, how should state organs, institutions behave in relation to the Constitution generally and the people, especially human rights? So again, you will see that the Bill of Rights actually binds. I mean, the Constitution of Kenya binds all institutions. I mean, so again, you will see people say we want institutions, organizations, people in power to actually be subservient to this Constitution. They should be, inferior to this Constitution. So today, in the context of impeachment of Gachagua, you will see the Senate and some of the lawyers saying that the Senate is the final arbiter, but they are saying no. It's like nobody whose rights is being infringed in the Senate should actually move courts of law. And yet, National Assembly or the Parliament is an organ that is supposed to be bound by the Constitution. So if you violate the Constitution, then it means that, according to their reasoning, nobody should actually move the courts of law to say my rights have been violated. So, and personally, I argue the opposite. I think Gachagua has a right to go to the courts and say, I was lynched. There was no compliance with Article 145, sub-Article 5 of the Constitution that requires I must appear in person because it's mandatory, The other question we ask ourselves is, what kind of leadership do we need in Kenya? In fact, this is what they say, one of the geniuses of Kenya's Constitution, Chapter 6, Leadership and Integrity, where Kenyans said we want a certain type and character of leaders. Well, whether we end up with those good characters of leaders as defined in Article 73, 75 or not is a different question. But Kenyans said this is the kind of leader that we want. So we also say that
define the behavior or character of the executive as he or she forms government. So you will see that in Article 129, Article 130, and of course the vetting of the executive presidential appointments. Thus, people said, no, we want to see a government that is national, because Article 130 is very clear that in forming the national executive, you must have the regional and ethnic diversities of the people of Kenya. This is what Kenyans told us. For example, another question was, what if members of parliament or the executive misbehave in excess of their power representation? You will find evidence of that in Article 104, that is the right to recall, and of course the term of office, that's Article 142, and removal in Article 144 and 145. That's why you have got the impeachment proceedings, removal on the grounds of incapacity and impeachment. Again, that's what Kenyans say before.
Good, Terry, you have a minute.
Okay. I'll just probably do two quick notes and then I stop. Then the other question was, how do we share the national cake? For some of you who come from the northern part of Kenya, like myself, and I can see some nomads in this group, we used to say that the Kenya of the North is totally not part of Kenya. And that's why we came up with Chapter 12 on public finance, where now, the national cake had to be divided equitably. And of course, the question of independent officers, you will see that in Chapter 15, and timelines and all that. So I think in a nutshell, there is a lot of what Kenyans told us that is evidenced in the text of the Constitution. I think I'll stop there. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Terry. Very good. I would like to read comments that have been put across, and I allow, and we open it to the people or other people to ask questions and probably make their points. We'd give 3 minutes to speakers that we are allowed to speak. And if you're on the speaker, please, we request that you mute your mic so that we don't have any interference. Let me read some of the comments that we have so far. I've seen someone asking that we record the spaces. All our spaces are recorded. Amos Ngongo is saying, if Kenya's 2010 constitution was a people-driven process, why has it become impossible to implement it? I have always maintained that the real constitution that Kenyans vouched for was manipulated and bastardized in Naivasha by the COE to meet specific political interests. There is Erickson Odhiambo said Ekuru Aukot is also party leader of Third Way Party and leader author Punguza Mizigo. Wambura is asking a question to Ekuru Aukot. COK as an elite, is it an elitist of ambitious document? The 2/3 gender principle, was it well thought of? Is it tenable more so? Is it tenable more so an elective position? How can it be realized? There are quite a number of them. I can't read all of them. We've got quite a number of comments. That's partly, and I've also seen Honorable Dr. Jeff Kaluyu, who said, seem to have lost it. Yeah, he says, insisting on our constitution is progressive and overlooking its problems is retrogressive. Example, tribalism and freedom of association can't exist in the same sentence. The quarterbacking with NCAC makers look bad. Keeping our traditional heritage and tribalism don't work. Okay, that's a few of the comments that have been made. And at this point, I'd like to allow Justice. Okay, Mizani, I see your hand is up. I get back to you. Then we have Justice for All, followed by Wendy, and then Marabu Stock. Mizani?
Yes, thanks, Obed. I think the conversation is very intriguing. And I'm looking at a comment here by Joel Gitali, who says, this was not a committee of experts, but a committee of activists. The Kenyan constitution is the most difficult to implement and inappropriate for Africa. It is a bad constitution, very costly and unrealistic. And I think I'd like to hear what Weston has to say about that later on when he has the mic. But we also have a comment here by one, what is the name? Pan Africa. Why wasn't diaspora included in the constitution as a county? Well, that is interesting. When the committee of expert bosses here will tell us more about that. We also have Wambura, who says, Professor Migai, anyone interested on matters the constitution with a background of BSc and MA and policy, can one do PhD law specializing on constitutional and law? That is what Wambura is asking. I think that's directly to you, Prof. You'll be able to answer when you have the opportunity. And then we also have one comment here that I'd like to go through. That is from Zawadi. My first vote was for the Constitution of Kenya. The Constitution is the best thing that has ever happened to Kenya. That's according to Zawadi. I don't know about you, Joe, and if there's something you think you've picked out of this, and possibly a quick question before we proceed to the next speakers on the plenary.
Thank you very much, Eli. I think there's a very interesting comment here on the comment section. I don't know whether you've gone through it, Obeds or Eli, but there's Joel Gitali saying, this was not a committee of experts, but a committee of activists. The Kenyan constitution is the most difficult to implement and inappropriate for Africa. It is a bad constitution, very costly and unrealistic. I mean, those are very interesting comments. I would also want to hear what Dr. would say about that as we progress. Back to you, Eli.
So we have two Dactaris. We'll come to you later on to give those responses. But I think with your permission, Obeds, let's go to Justice for All. Good evening, my brother. Welcome to the call.
Good evening, my brothers. Very, very good conversation tonight. For me, I will restrict myself to the comment you made earlier that our Kenyan constitution was a copy and paste of the US Constitution. And then, of course, I make my statement that that is completely wrong. And I will illustrate it with 3 points. And then, of course, I will have our friend Dr. Kurokot respond to that because it's a distortion of the U.S. Constitution. Just beginning with that. My beginning point will be on of course, I will only speak on the impeachment way they drafted this process that completely really looked into the aspect of how does impeachment happen in the US and how we're doing it now in Kenya. So at a later stage, I would want to ask, and again, Dr. Court, if you can point that out, is that the impeachment process of the president and the vice president, the US, of course, deputy president in Kenya. I don't know why we thought it's better to use deputy president in Kenya. You guys will give us the wisdom. You are making it look like it's the same process. But then the question is, in the United States, and I think Dr. Okot knows that, Migai knows that for the impeachment process, when it gets to the Senate, the person that is presiding over that is the Supreme Court Chief Justice. In that case, the president of the Chief Justice, and then it becomes final. Now, why did you open it up to the point that a Speaker of the Senate presides this, and then, for heaven's sake, there's a loophole for us to go into the legal process to address this issue through the courts and all that? Because you know very well that if we are trying to impeach a president in the US, the presider of once it comes from the House, which is like I'm talking about the equivalent of the National Assembly in Kenya. When it comes to the Senate, the presider of that process is the Supreme Court Justice Roberts, who has to do it, and then after that, it's final. So why do you leave that loophole? So that's my first thought process in terms of this constitution making process. My second thought, and probably the last one, is okay, okay, go ahead, Mizan. Sorry about that.
No, you can ask that. You can ask that question because I think I was trying to alert you on time.
Okay.
Let me give you a minute.
Okay, I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it at that. I have two other questions, but if my time is up, that's fine. I will leave it at that. But I want to know that the loopholes that were left in between, that now court has a way to intervene. Why didn't we make it final? And then why didn't we make it mandatory that there's a committee that has to investigate and validate, and then we made it optional that, oh, you can form a committee to investigate the claims or articles of impeachment. I think in Kenya we don't use words of articles. Why didn't we make it mandatory? So in this constitutional making process in the impeachment, which I'm interested in, why didn't we make it mandatory that we have to have a committee that is going to investigate, validate, and then say that, yes, we need to move to the committee of the whole or the House to deal with this. Thank you very much, guys, for giving me a chance. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Justice, for all. Very good. I would like to hear what Marabou Stock has, then we go to Wendy. Marabou Stock, it's your opportunity to make your comment or to ask a question.
Greetings in the name of His Majesty. I thought Wendy was going first. You know, we always let ladies go first, but we'll make an exception. So, Ekurokot, and this is for you. I heard that a former president say that he was amazed that Turkana was making the constitution, and I wanted to know from your opinion. What do you think is the impact of somebody who is living and is disdainful to follow your constitution? What I mean is, if you wrote a constitution and people don't view you as somebody who is properly, would it interfere with the adherence to the constitution? All right, because William Ruto might not be following the constitution because he just knows that Ekuru wrote it, and probably the way he views you prevents him from adhering to this constitution. That is the first question. The second question is the development of enabling legislation under the fifth schedule. You were supposed to make laws that were supposed to enable the constitution come into being. And right now, almost these years, there are some of these laws that have not yet, that are still pending. For instance, the legislation on public procurement and asset disposal, the Fair Hearing Act, which you have put it on Article 50, is still pending. The rights of person detained, held in custody and detained is still pending. So what punishments do you give to Parliament if they fail to make these enabling legislations to ensure that our constitution is fully implemented? Because I don't see nowhere where you put down these conditions that Parliament will suffer some form of punishment if they fail. And when I go through this document that I have, there are so many legislations that were supposed to be enacted within 2 years, some within 18 months, some within a year, which are still pending as we speak today. Lastly, I want to know about this amendment of the Constitution to increase the presidential term limit. Why is it that you left this issue to become a Parliament issue? Yet the term limit for me is supposed to be part of a referendum, part of our constitution making process. And lastly, this question goes to Doctor. You say that the constitution is written in plain English and plain language so that anybody can interpret it. What would be your interpretation of chapter 1, which talks about the people shall, when it comes to taking back their power from their representatives? How would you interpret this part of legislation, and how shall the people take back their power from their representative? Thank you very much for the time, Jobless.
Thank you so much, Marabou Stock. Wendy, your comment or question, 3 minutes.
Hi, thanks, Obed, and thanks, Marabou. Bless. And maybe just to answer one of your questions, just because you disdain a legal drafter, that does not take away from the legitimacy of the law. So whether or not William Ruto likes Dr. Ekuru Aukot, it doesn't take away from the legitimacy of the law. And I think just to respond to one of the comments, to say that the Constitution is is bad and not fit for Africa. It misses the point of lawmaking from above and below. So the fact that a committee of experts involved the people, I think that sort of, it's, someone once said you can give a toaster to a caveman and they won't know what to do with it. So in this case, we have a good constitution. I won't say who the cavemen are who don't know how to deal with this constitution. And so the fact that they consulted acted as a conduit between the people and sort of the I don't know how to explain, like lawmaking from above and below. And then I think Western, you keep pounding on this point of ethnicity and we should recognize culture, language. And I think there's sort of a risk in that. I think I have to acknowledge the Berlin Conference of 1885. The colonial master came, divided nations and created countries. However, to sort of stick onto that, I'll give an example of Ambassador Martin Kimani at the UN Security Council, where he espoused the principle of uti possidetis juris, sort of respecting sovereign boundaries that were there. So he didn't say that exactly, but sort of espoused the principle of how we should respect our sort of colonial boundaries. I won't rely on that, but our founding fathers in their wisdom in 1963 sort of saw that if you move towards this sort of where we used to be, there's this hangover of, oh, we used to be like this. There's a risk of sort of creating a nationalist, because let me give an example of myself. I'm an ethnic Luo. Just in Ethiopia alone, there are over 18 Luo tribes. You go to Uganda, all the way to Congo, and so if we start sort of the hangover of how we used to be, they sort of you risk sort of bringing up nationalism and endless conflicts. And so I agree, ethnicity is sort of a source of identity and pride, but it should not be foregrounded. And so yeah, I think my main question was on the parliamentary systems, but Prof, you answered that. And then again, there's this point of we borrowed the language of the US Constitution. Yes, I think I've said this before. The law is like a golden thread. So no matter how it is written or where we borrow it from, there are certain, as Dr. Ekuru Okot said, there are certain principles, irreducible minimums that are inherent to you as a person. I think we said that in another space as a human being. So for example, the Bill of Rights. However, someone had said we should have borrowed the culture, but again, with caution, America is one of the most unequal, divided societies. So if you look at the health sector, racial inequality, so I don't see a problem sort of in borrowing legal language to sort of draft the constitution, but maybe caution on the culture. I think those are my main points, and I'll land at that. Thanks.
Thank you. I'd recommend, Dr. I'm hoping you're taking the point of the questions people are asking, as well as Prof and Weston.
I am, but I hope you will also be able to remind me, because sometimes I get there's a little bit of people break up, but hopefully you've also taken and you can remind me if I forget some of them.
No problem. That is noted. I'd like to go to Kumbukeni, and then we go to Daktari Onyango. So Kumbukeni,
Okay.
or did she drop?
I'm here. Asante. Obed, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, good. Thank you. So,
you have 3 minutes. I didn't tell you that.
Asante. My questions, I have 5 of them. Were the Wananchi in the rural areas involved? If yes, how was this process implemented? The regular Wananchi, I don't mean the elite. And then who were the non-citizen members of the committee? Dr. Okot, yesterday you gave us the homework of reading the review. And in the review, it's mentioned that there were non-citizen members of the committee. Who were they and why were they?
Kumbukeni, my apologies. Please move closer to your mic so that we can hear you well.
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Slightly better.
Higher. So who were the non-citizen members of the committee? Why were they involved in the constitution making of a sovereign nation? And then what inspired Ekuru Aukot to draft the Punguza Mizigo Bill in 2019, given that he was the CEO of the committee that wrote the constitution in 2010? When I hear that there are reviews, this is the other one. So this is the 4th question. When I hear there are reviews done on African governance by the AU, I must ask myself, what good are they? Because I see a dysfunctional governance system in all of NC Ubuntu Africa. So the AU keeps touting these, talking big about there's this review, there's that review. What good is it to us if it is not being implemented and we do not see the benefits of them? And then the last one is Article 73 and 75 are very clear on the character of government officials and specifically the president. And given what I have read on those two articles, the provisions there, we know that the current president does not meet any of these provisions in the articles. So what actions are put in place in the constitution to ensure that Kenyans now can essentially fire the president due to his failure to meet the standard of leadership? Asante.
Wow, that's really nice. There's one that was sent. Let me just read it because I think it's important. I don't know who will pick it, but somebody says, many of you are lawyers, as you have made us to think. This is from Yolamo. But you're asking same questions as laymen ask. When are you going to be proactive and help Kenya with your knowledge? He says only Omtata is the only one feeling injunctions as required by law. So I think that will probably be responded to at some point by someone. Kumbuken, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I forgot one more because I didn't write it down. Just one more. Ekuru Okot has been on Kumbukeni and he mentioned that there was an article or a provision on the article on land, and that they had drafted they had an original draft, but when the Brits, and I suspect that the Brits are part of the non-citizen members of the committee, when they saw that part of the constitution, they were not happy with it, and they asked the committee to redraft it, and the committee changed it. What was this land? What was the original language on land, and why did they change it? And what did the Brits want it to be changed to? What issue did they have with the original language?
Thank you, Kumbukeni. Dr. Onyango, your 3 minutes.
Thank you, Obed. I hope you can hear me.
100%, yes.
Great. Thank you. My first question has already been covered by Kumbukeni on land, so I will go straight to the second one. I would have wanted to know from the mind of Dr. Okot, who was there while drafting this constitution, what was in the mind of the constitution drafters concerning the provincial administration, especially with regard to how on implementation we came and decided to accommodate both the former provincial administration as we used to know it, all the way from the sub-location upwards to the, to the provincial commissioners, whom I think we renamed to regional commissioners. And especially in light of that matter of security, how in the minds of the constitution drafters, the committee of experts, was security to be managed at the local level, given that security, according to the new constitution, remained to be a national government function, yet it transcends all the way from the national level to the villages. And that might have informed why on implementation, the administration in power at that time decided to retain the former provincial administration. And by so doing, we have a lot of duplication of responsibilities. And there is a lot of, we are complaining about the public wage bill and corruption and all these issues. Yet we have a lot of duplication of functions between the former provincial administration and how we decided to retain it in light of the new constitution. Then my last one is a comment regarding, I hear people say, oh, we have a wrong constitution, we needed to work on our moral fabric. And I've just been wondering, how long will it take us to work on a moral fabric and begin to inculcate new cultures? And it looks like unless we were making a constitution that is not going to be implemented now, maybe for another generation that will come, when we will have already inculcated a new culture and built a new moral fabric. Yeah, and I see that question keeps coming up, that our problem is values and culture. But when are we going to have to correct this? Because as the saying goes, it is difficult to teach an old dog new tricks. How are we going, for example, to stop corruption, to stop the police from collecting bribes on the road? How are we going to change that moral fabric? Can we begin to inculcate new values and new cultures to the police who are already collecting bribes on the road today? Or for us to come up with a new police service with new cultures, it looks like it will happen in another generation. To me, I think all we need is political goodwill from the top. And I believe if the president...
Secretary, you have 30 seconds.
Yeah, I believe if we had political goodwill where the president stands to say that there is not going to be corruption, then it will transcend down and corruption can stop. But to say that we need to change the moral fabric, it looks like we have to wait for another generation to come with different values and cultures for these things that we're talking about to happen. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. You've really cracked me up, because partially what you speak to is the only thing I'm concerned about is you have removed yourself from it, because we are part of this problem, I guess. Our first round of comments and questions will end with Honorable Agostino Neto. And then, Joe, I'll allow you to speak after Agostino when you invite Dr. and Prof to answer the questions. So, Neto, your opportunity to make your comments, that'll be the first round. You'll be the last one on the first round of comments, and then we hear what the panelists are going to say.
Thank you very much, Mizani. Thank you very much, Obed, and everyone who is on the space this evening. Maybe it's to first start by acknowledging that Professor Mikaya Ketch was my teacher of international trade law at the University of Nairobi. So that at least I shall give the professor his flowers, and I know he's good at his trade. I got more comments than questions. The first is to agree with Dr. Aukot that elite capture of governance systems was part of the problems in the Kenyan constitutional making process. And of course, you still see that elite capture is still rearing its head even under this new constitution. So maybe we really need to moving forward, see how to deal with the Kenyan elite. That's my first comment. The second comment I'd like to say is that, yes, the Constitution 2010 did a very good job in terms of trying to tame the towering executive, the imperial executive that was under the old Constitution. And, Professor Migai was speaking about the constitutional review process and the Bomas process. When Moi just prorogued Parliament and made the constitutional making process that was happening at Bomas a nullity. So part of the taming of the executive that happened under the Constitution of 2010 was, that the National Assembly is able to be in charge of its own calendar. So right now, for example, President Ruto is not able to prorogue Parliament, or it's not able to send Parliament home. Parliament in its own wisdom has to set its own calendar. Parliament, again, is also in charge of its budget. And then also the oversight in the appointing of the executive appointees, the CSS, the PSS. So yes, the Constitution 2010, attempted in its wisdom to tame the towering imperial executive that was under the old Constitution. The judiciary again was given a chance to take care of its own affairs. With the judges having a tenure, the JSC again being put in place, and also of course giving the judges a little bit more lifetime in office. But the third thing that I wanted to say are what, in my view, were missteps. And I pick this, Dr. Ukot, in your request that we look at the Review Act 2008. I think part of the things that we did not get correct under this constitution, and of course, it will be interesting how you react or respond to it, was number one, I think the electoral system. The electoral system, Kenya should have been we should have been honest with ourselves that the first past the post electoral system in a country like Kenya, one, is too expensive, and it's one that we cannot deal with, and that is why the question, for example, on the truth agenda principle that someone asked, it would be very difficult to attain the truth agenda principle in an electoral system that's first past the post, unless you, for example, put in implementation frameworks in the constitution, like for example, the Ugandan constitution with the mixed member proportionate. So to put in the agenda principle in a first past the post system and not providing for it, I think was part of the missteps that we had in this particular constitution 2010. So I really think that one, the electoral system was something that we should have thought about. The second one was a system of governance, and I'm happy that you mentioned that it was a contentious issue. And I contend with Professor Migai, not because he was my teacher, but it's because if you study African conflicts and African politics, it has always been argued that the best system of governance, for example, for Africa, would not be a presidential system of government, but a parliamentary system of governance. If you look at the conflicts in Horn of Africa, the best way to deal with conflicts in the Horn of Africa, you require people on the table, everyone else on the table, and the best way to get people on the table is more through a parliamentary system of governance. What you need to do is to put rigid frameworks around it in a way that you cushion it for purposes of moving forward. So I really think that in our settling for a presidential system of government, that was another misstep. The third misstep, in my view, if you look at the Review Act of 2008, quite a bit of the structuring and the drafting of the Constitution 2010 was borrowed quite a bit from the South African drafting process. But the constitutional court that was set under the Review Act of 2008, I think, failed us quite a bit, because if you look at the drafting of the South African Constitution with regard to the first constitutional amendment, the second constitutional amendments, those are amendments that were done by the Constitutional Court that was created within the Review Act that was helping the promulgation of the Constitution. So our Review Act 2008, I think, failed in terms of giving the Constitutional Court that was designed therein the chance to amend, to make constitutional amendments in a way that would have been progressive. So if you noticed, and I had the chance, of course, to have been in that parliament at that time, that there were more than there were thousands of constitutional amendments that were then proposed at on the floor of Parliament, which was not possible to deal with, and that is how come Parliament then passed most parts of the Constitution without any particular review, because the Constitutional Court that was set within the meaning of the Review Act 2008 fell short of what it was supposed to be. My last two comments: that yes, again, there was need to show or put in place under the Constitution how the sovereigns could exercise their power directly, and I think that is one thing. If at all you have a chance to amend this constitution, we really need to think and ask ourselves a question with regard to how would, for example, the sovereigns exercise their power directly, especially now that we thought with the check and balances systems that I spoke about, with the parliament and the judiciary, they have both gone rogue. We've had institutions that have gone rogue, both the judiciary and the National Assembly and the Senate have gone rogue. So what is then the recourse that the citizens would have? And that I think should be there should be an overt provision in terms of how we do that with regard to making the constitutional process move forward. I land. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you very much, Obeds, and the speakers. First of all, I'll just give my questions before we move away, before we go forward with the conversation. I have a few questions here for Daktari. The first question, Dr. Ekuru, that is. The first question is, Dr. Ekuru, you talked about constitutionality. And basically, I am asking, how can we achieve this constitutionality? Because I think one concern that was raised yesterday by one of the speakers was the interpretation of the Constitution, and it was concerning that he felt that the interpretation of the Constitution by Professor Makau and even Ojienda, he was concerned about the interpretation of the Constitution. So how can we achieve constitutionality, yet in the same document that we say is written in plain English, we can have a difference in interpretation just from the common. I don't want to talk about High Court having the mandate to interpret the Constitution. I mean, it is supposed to be the normal Kenyan is supposed to be able to interpret it as well. But we can have several interpretations based on personal views and even political orientation. How can we then achieve constitutionality with this in mind? Number two, when you talked about contagious issues, during the process of drafting the Constitution and the Constitution, you actually even talked about getting views from the people. You went around the country and got views. I would wish to know the views of the people on Article 147, because that is currently a contagious issue. Why? Because I am one of those people who feel, because you talked about this yesterday as well, like you said, we were moving away from the vice president who was appointed by the president, and we are now having an elected deputy president. In this article, I don't see clear roles and functions of the deputy president other than being a principal assistant. The president, as per Article 132, has clear roles. We talk about them as the presidency, but when it comes to role, I don't see the presidency. So that is a question I would wish you answer in terms of Article 147. And also because I still feel the deputy president is at the mercy of the president, because still the president has to give roles to the deputy president. That's another question. And maybe the final question for me would be, no, not really a question, but just a submission. I think Daktari talked about the other Daktari, I think it's called Onyango or something, about principles and values and things like that. I think our constitution has done so well in terms of affirming them. In Article 10, we see in principles and values of principles of governance. We see Article 201 to principles of public finance. We see 174 and 175 talking about principles and object of devolution. And we see even 232 principles of public service and things like that. I think our constitution has affirmed the values and things like that. So I don't think we should be having issues of values in our governance system. That's just a submission. So in the next round, I'm gonna allow our main speakers, each of them 8 minutes, because there's questions that have been raised. And I'm gonna start with Dr. Ekuru. You are 8 minutes. Then we'll go to Professor Migai, then Weston. So I'm gonna start with Dr. Ekuru. Take the mic.
Okay, so I'll try to be very, very brief. First of all, I think the COE, let's first understand one thing, that constitution making is actually a negotiated agreement. People bring all their issues, especially in a society such as ours that at that time was emerging from conflict. So it's negotiation. It is not everybody's view that you put on the constitution. And that's why I was saying earlier that at some point when you are making a constitution, there is a risk of reducing it into being a shopping list of interests and needs. So that's not possible in any constitution. So constitution is also about compromise. What can I live with and what can I not live with? And that's why I was talking about irreducible minimums, basically the common good to everybody in society. So let's not beat ourselves so hard that if certain things are not clear. And that's why we put in the Constitution Articles 255, 256, and 257 on how you can bring some amendments to align the Constitution to the needs of the society at the time. Now, let me start by the first question was the committee of experts being elitist, or vis-a-vis being activists. I think that was the word. No, I don't think so. Actually, luckily for us as the committee of experts, many of us actually had come from a human rights perspective. We had experience with the civil society organization. So we honestly were committed to ensuring that we deliver this constitution. We did not want another failed process. And as I said earlier, we are not saying that our constitution is perfect. And by the way, you'll be surprised how much our constitution is actually celebrated in the continent. And I have gone around many countries in Africa and also out of the continent to just speak about the making of our constitution. No constitution is perfect. Even the so-called American constitution that people sometimes like to quote, I mean, it has undergone so many amendments because it wasn't perfect at the time of writing it. On the impeachment, yes, I agree that we should have been more clearer and say that why did we leave? I don't think we leave any loophole. Why did we not make it final? I think in the context of what we have today, the kind of parliament we have today, I think you'll agree with me, it was important that we didn't make it final because we also at that time were dealing with very bad manners from politicians. Some of them who actually were opposed to this constitution, including the current president. You can imagine today if impeachment was finalized at the Senate without giving the courts of law an opportunity. If you look at, for example, even the question of Gachagua, without necessarily going into the merits or demerits of it, it's on face value, it's actually political lynching. The Constitution at Article 145, sub-Article 5 is very clear that it's mandatory for him to appear before the Senate. But they denied him that chance. Yet, according to under the standing orders, in exceptional circumstances, remember Article 150, sub-Article 2 says, with necessary modification, you can impeach the deputy president the same way you impeach the president, but with necessary modification. Now, in this particular case, we would have expected that when the standing orders say in exceptional circumstances, somebody falling sick and is admitted, surely it's not a matter of emergency. They could have given an opportunity to say, come another time, because there's no time frame for Senate to conclude. It is only the committee, the select committee of 11, that has 10-day time frame. So I'll leave it to that. Well, I'm not going to comment about the Turkana thing. By the way, it was not Ruto who said that. It was actually the late President Daniel Moi. And since he's down 6 feet under, let's not talk about him. On the 5th schedule, when Parliament fails, I will refer you to basically to Article 261 from sub-article 1 to sub-article 8. And in sub-article 7 of 261, when Parliament fails to pass the legislation as provided for in Article 5th schedule, Parliament shall stand dissolved. When you'll remember that the David Maraga, CJ Emeritus, actually advised President Uhuru Kenyatta to actually dissolve Parliament because they had failed to pass certain legislations. And of course, Uhuru Kenyatta refused to do that. Now, to Kumbukeni, yes, we did actually go around the country because remember the committee under the Constitution of Kenya Review Act of 2008, we had 1 year to complete the process. And when we brought the Statute Law Miscellaneous Amendment Act of 2009, we increased the time to about 6 months. We were committed as the committee expert to complete this project within that time frame because we did not want to be the excuse why Kenyans do not want a new constitution. Because remember, we are comparing the independence constitution and what Kenyans now want. So yes, we went around the country. We held, I had about, I had 210 constituency educators at that time. And then we also divided, we had 8 regional coordinators. So we tried to reach as many Kenyans as possible. We tried to use radios, TV, and all that. So we tried to reach as many Kenyans as possible, but of course it was not possible to reach each and every Kenyan. So the Mwananchi voice was actually included in the constitution making process. Now the non-citizens members were 3 of them: Professor Chaloka Beyani from Zambia, Professor Sempebwa from Uganda, and Christina Murray from South Africa. And they came as a result of the eminent personalities. Remember, during the post-election violence, Kofi Annan was leading a group of eminent personalities who were actually trying to broker a truce between Raila Odinga and Kibaki at that time. So it was felt that we need, under the National Accord. So we had that group of non-citizen to come and help us with. And by the way, they were very instrumental. If you look at, for example, the system of government, it was tricky for a Kenyan to actually lead that process, especially the conversation. So we asked, Chaloka Beyan to lead that. On matters transition, when can the constitution come into effect, we asked Christina Murray to do that as a South African. And on devolution, because it was also contentious, we asked Sempebwa because to bring his experience from Uganda. So that's why. The 2000 the Punguza Mizigo Constitution Amendment Bill of 2019 that I promoted through our party Third Way was actually meant to address the cost of governance in Kenya. And I think I'm more than happy again to share that bill with all of you, because we felt that yes, we were very emotional at the time of passing this constitution, but the truth for the matter is people never considered the cost of governance, especially the bloated parliament, the nominations, the 1450 wards, the 47 counties. And that's why we brought it back, because at that time you couldn't touch 47 counties. Everybody wanted a county on their own. They wanted the constituencies expanded. But we felt that after about 9 years, now I think we can soberly think about, can we actually afford to fund this constitution? And of course, people ignored the last report of the committee of experts, where we warned that yes, you can adapt this constitution, but it's going to be very expensive for Kenyans. I think on the issues of land, you're probably referring to Article 65 on natural environment and land. Yes, if you know that, you ought to know that some of the largest landowners in Kenya actually are the British nationals, of course, courtesy of colonialism. And when we were reducing the lease period from 999 years to 99 for non-citizens, of course, they made a lot of noise and they tried to influence the chapter, but they never influenced us. And that I can assure you for a fact. We still stood by what the people of Kenya wanted. us to do. On provincial administration, I'll refer you to the 6th schedule, particularly section 17 of that schedule. And we had actually abolished provincial administration in the draft before this final one. And we had said that the system called provincial administration should stand abolished. It was the politicians, actually Kibaki, the parliamentarians, are the ones who actually pushed for us to retain that provincial administration. But if you look at the language in section 17, we say that it shall be restructured to accord respect to the system of devolution. Of course, I must say that there was a level of naivety on our part. We thought that everybody really wanted a new constitution, everybody wanted change, but that was not the case to be. Mheshimiwa Agostino, I agree with you. Our electoral system is very expensive, and that's why when I put in Punguza Mizigo Constitutional Amendment Bill, I wanted to even automate it for people to even be able to vote through the phones and to make commissioners part-time. So we are reducing again that cost of our election. And I think when you read our bill, you will see how much we are going to save in terms of billions of money. The Constitutional Court, it was actually called the Interim Constitutional Court. The idea in that court, I think that was an amendment to Section 47 of the old Constitution. The idea was that Kenyans were very tired with the judiciary at the time. They did not want anything constitutional to be litigated in the judiciary as it is, because judiciary was a target. That's why the interim independent interim constitutional court was actually formed, and it was to be presided over by people who are not judicial officers at the time. And I think we had three of them. Now, in terms of Article 1, Mheshimiwa Agostino, I agree with you that we need to relook into this article where the sovereign now can exercise this power directly, because as it is almost impossible. And if you look at, for example, the example of Article 104, Chapter 6 of the Constitution of Kenya, we had said that Parliament shall pass legislation to bring into effect this chapter. That is on the legislature, Parliament, and of course Chapter 6. But they passed legislation that made it almost impossible to recall a member of Parliament. They passed legislation that made it impossible for people to comply with Article 73 and 75 when they are holding public office. So they watered down those provisions. On the last speaker, on the question of constitutionality and constitutionalism, I think let me clarify this. Constitutionality basically is the presence of laws, the passage of laws. Constitutionalism is basically living the culture, the belief in those laws. I think I was talking about constitutionalism. That's where we are going wrong, but not constitutionality. We have enough laws. We have passed so many laws in this country, but they're not being implemented. On contentious issues, read Article 147, I think I'll refer you to Article 147, Article 3, and it's very clear that when the president is absent or is temporarily incapacitated, and during any other period, the deputy president shall act as the president. So yes, Article 147 initially, Article 1 talks about the deputy president being the principal assistant to the president. But there is also a requirement that the president must actually apportion some responsibility to his deputy. So it is the relationship between the president and the deputy president that, for me, is the problem here. So you have people who go into a ticket to be elected as a ticket, but once they get into power, the fighting starts. But the only time I think the deputy president can exercise powers as the president is when the president is temporarily absent or is incapacitated. I think in a nutshell, I'll leave it there, and hopefully Prof and Western can also just chip in if I've skipped anything. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daktari. I even though I'm still not satisfied with Article 147, and you've referred me to Part 3, which talks about the incapacitation. I wish, it's very rare to find a president incapacitated. It has been very rare even to achieve that when the president, the deputy president actually acts as the president. But again, also, I mean, I would have loved if the deputy president also is given roles in the constitution, maybe as an appointing authority in some sectors, But I mean, it is subject to debate, though. So,
No, but I think just to add very quickly, the real job is that the idea basically is that you have got one commander in chief, and that commander in chief is actually the president. And if you look at sub-article 2, it requires that the president actually can confer certain function on his deputy. And I think this is about a working relationship, is a partnership to deliver because that's why they are the presidency. They are one ticket. So I think the problem is that the political relationship between the president and his deputy. And if you look at the nature of our politics today, is that I want to run for president. So who is it that I can invite to be a deputy president who can bring me a vote from a certain region, from a certain tribe? I think that's where the problem is. But if they sit down and say that we must deliver on the presidency, then there's no reason why I do not see the idea of a president saying, maybe you can supervise ministries and departments. Let me handle other things. I think this is about people sitting down and actually agreeing, what can I do? Because the Constitution provides the principle of how they can actually coexist. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you.
Joe, I think I think we need a healthy president and one that is not incapacitated in any way for him to be able to do a good job. The only thing that I think we have is bad manners within our political class, and people using their stomachs to think instead of using their brain, which is what has plagued us for a long time. And you can see that from what professors of law are doing online and saying things that honestly even a child can be able to express. I think I've seen. I'd like to appreciate. I've seen, or is it somebody Odoyo Owidi? I would like to have him come on to the speaker and probably give a perspective on this.
Please,
But
before he does,
Professor,
I need to go. So if you can just allow me 3 minutes, I really must go.
Yeah, please. No problem.
So there are 3 things that I want to talk about, and they relate to power dynamics in any society, the provincial administration and land. So number one, in terms of power, I mean, I've spent my academic life studying power, and you see, in constitution making in any society is bound to be subject to the power dynamics in that society, and unfortunately, it happens that the people that have the power tend to be the elites. The elites will always try to hold on to what they have, and consequently, all constitution making processes suffer from that. And Kenya's case is not any different. And so any constitution is going to be a reflection of the power dynamics in any society, which is why for a very long time the politicians held us hostage and we couldn't make progress without them until we conceded in some major respects to them. How do we change that? We can only change that by civic education, by empowering our people. In theoretical terms, we talk of democracy as requiring 2 things, 3 things. If you read the work of Robert Dahl, for example, I love his work. Anybody who has a chance, look for the book Democracy and Its Critics. It is an excellent exposition of what democracy is all about. Dahl talks about a number of things that for a polity to be democratic, the people must have agenda control. You can only have control over the agenda. Number 2, if there is enlightened understanding. And this is where civic education comes in, so that the people are not beholden to the politicians. They know what they want. They are independent. So unless we have those attributes, we'll always have these situations where the elite control what happens in a polity. Number 2, I want to talk about the provincial administration. If you understand how power is exercised in this country, you can never have a government without the provincial administration. That is how the British designed the Kenya polity. I wrote about this in an article that I called The Ambivalent Legacy of English Law. The English governed us autocratically, but claimed the rule of law, hence the ambivalence. So it was unrealistic to expect that they would get rid of the provincial administration. They were never going to get rid of the provincial administration. They were just going to find a different way of ensuring that it survives. Because the logic of the Kenyan state is that there must be a provincial administration. Even the National Intelligence Service, if you see their operatives, their sons and daughters of former provincial commissioners, district commissioners, name them. All of them, without exception. These are the people that rule Kenya. Until we change that, nothing is ever going to change. Number 3, land. I worked on the national land policy of 2009. Guess what our greatest obstacle was? It was the large landowners. And guess who these are? They are the British. And they told us point blank, they told us, this policy of yours is not going anywhere. We will ensure that it does not go anywhere.
Did we lose Prof?
Have you lost me? Where did you lose me?
Now
Where did you lose
you're
me?
back again.
Where did you lose
The
me?
British fighting back. The British fighting back.
In terms of the land policy.
Yes, that's where you are.
Yeah, so they told us that these are the people that own the ranches. They told us, you are not going to get anywhere. We will ensure that we dilute this. You're not going to get your way. So the version of what we had, what we envisaged in the land policy framework was a very radical policy. Guess who stopped it? It was the British. And guess who they used to stop it? Our own very name it, the Minister of Land, the President, name it. They told us we are going to stop it. And guess what? They stopped it. So again, until we deal with, with this land question, we deal with the British in particular in the land question, we are not going to get anywhere. So what you have, in short, what I'm saying, what you have in the Constitution, in terms of land, is a very diluted version of what we envisaged in the national land policy making process. Anyone who's interested, I still have the notes, including what the British were telling us then. This was from around 204. Worked on this from 204 to 209. That is what I wanted to say. Thank you very much. Please allow me to go.
Thank you, Prof. But
My
before
apology.
you leave, just a burning question, Prof. Do we really need to change our constitution to satisfy political ideas or political needs, rather? Like for the case of BBI, it was a process that was trying to bring in an additional guys into the public payroll, as I would say. I mean, do we really need this to just amend our constitution just to satisfy political ideas in the name of bringing unity or something like that in our country?
No, you see, you have to realize that constitutions are always made for the future. But past generations can never rule the future from the grave, because if you make it difficult for the constitution to be changed, essentially you're telling future generations that they're stuck with the choices of the past. That can never happen. But if you look at it, look at it from the power dynamics in a society. The only reason that politicians get their way is because they have power. So what you need is, and which is why I like the Punguza Mzigo initiative, because it is looking at this from the perspective of Wanjiku. It is trying to empower Wanjiku and say, let this emanate from Wanjiku's perspective. Provided that initiatives to amend the constitution have sufficient support from the public, I don't see any problem with it. The problem, what you are alluding to, is that there's some politicians who think that they can manipulate us as a public, or they can railroad us into making changes to the constitution that suits them. That is a problem. So how do we safeguard it? We safeguard it by informing citizens that the power is with them. It is through civic education. If you were to ask me today, what is the greatest need in the democratic space in Kenya? For me, it is civic education. We must continue to educate our citizens because, as they say, democracy is not a system of government for fools. It requires enlightened understanding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. And also thank you for just taking time out of your busy schedule to join this conversation today. We are
My pleasure.
Yes. We keep asking you to join us in any other space that we host and just give us your opinions and what you have to say. We really appreciate your presence today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd have loved to stay on, but I've just come from a journey. I need to prepare for some things.
Yeah, take some rest and drink a lot of water, as Mizani always always advises.
Thank you.
Okay, so next, I think I'll invite.
So may I ask a question, Mizani Obet, the real Joe?
Sure, go ahead.
I have some litigation coming up tomorrow morning. What time are we finishing so that I know what time to turn off?
10:30.
Okay, that's fine. I can stay on the next 30 minutes.
Thank you. So you want to ask the question, or just go ahead and invite the next speaker?
No, that's the question I wanted to know.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm gonna invite Weston. Weston, you tend to think that the moral fabric is an issue in our country, and that is what sometimes informs some decisions, some bad decisions in our governance and things like that. I think also it is important to note, Weston, that you're one of those people who think our constitution is expensive. Let me invite you to the mic. You can give us also your submissions, Weston. Karibu.
Asante, the real Joe. Yes, Joe. You see, for instance, when you hear a section of the American society saying that their founding fathers did not contemplate having someone like Donald Trump running for president and winning, they're alluding to the traditions in that society. What caliber of a person should run for public office? What kind of mores and norms undergird the society? What is expected of public life? If you're a president of the United States of America, or if you hold any prominent position in the government, you're the face of the society. We lack that. We lack that. Institutions properly defined refer to traditions and cultures of a society. When you see a Kenyan, there are certain things that would distinguish that person. We don't have it. When a public official behaves disgracefully, where the traditions, norms, and values, they do not protest before courts of law. They fall on their sword. In other jurisdictions and societies like Japan, Singapore, and those kind of places, you just take your life. That's extreme. Because you cannot bring yourself to the realization that you've fallen afoul of deeply cherished values and cultures in the society. And therefore, that is what breathes life into the Constitution, as opposed to what do specific chapters and articles say. Because those things, people can litigate them before courts of law. And how, they stretch their chances. I've broken the law here. I can go to court. With a good attorney, I can walk. In other societies where there are values, you don't do it. You don't even dare. You take moral responsibility and even political responsibility, because under your charge, somebody, committed an act of omission. which cost the country, quite a lot in terms of road accident, in terms of money going missing, and you had nothing to do with the money that went missing. But because you're the accounting person, you take moral responsibility and you resign. But in Kenya, you say, no, it was not me. It was my juniors who brought me those things to sign. I mean, I just signed. I mean, and it goes on and on. So that's what I mean. And therefore, if you look at Rigathi, for instance, in a given jurisdiction or society, I can put it to you, where there are values and deeply held morals, and where people are bound by certain principles because they appreciate the fact that if they don't hold those principles dearly, the whole notion of state building will collapse. Rigathi would have posted a near 100% disapproval, carry an opinion poll. In such a country, almost 100% of the people would disapprove of his behavior. But in Kenya, it's a cleavage issue. This issue is cleavage, clearly has divided the society, and it has given him political mileage. So that speaks to what I'm talking about, the death of morals in our society, and that cannot be cured by the law. In as much as the law is said to be inherently moral, and is also expected to inculcate morality in the society, but it cannot cure the moral infractions that we betray as a country. Secondly, it is expensive, the religion, this constitution, because of what the previous speakers have said, and because of what I said in my introductory remarks. The political elite in Kenya is predisposed to impunity, because with impunity, they can virtually get away with anything and everything, including murder. But when you introduce the rule of law and you ensure that the rule of law finds traction, well, they could go to jail. They could be banned from running for public office for life. They could lose ill-gotten wealth. You get? They could be barred from running for elections because they don't meet Chapter 6 of the Constitution. And that's the verdict. You can't run for office. There's nothing you can do. But they don't foresee that. They do not. And therefore, the problem is this constitution was about withdrawing money at a problem. It's top heavy. When you look at it, top heavy. Lots of offices at the center and at the periphery. The devolved units. Why? Because of the fractious politics at the ethnic axis. Then the framers of the constitution thought, look, let's give each Kenyan community some kind of a unit of administration. Let's create all sorts of independent commissions, and those commissions, we can appoint Kenyans across ethnic communities or tribes, if you like, and that crassly is defined as inclusivity. That's not inclusivity. That there's a Kikuyu, a Luo, a Maasai in a particular body, or there's a Kikuyu, a Luo, a Maasai in a cabinet. That is not inclusivity, really. Inclusivity goes deeper. It's about the Kenyan people. Do they feel part and parcel of the government? And that's why people will tell you they have had a president, but their material conditions have not changed. The president has come from a particular region, that our material conditions have not changed. But this crass interpretation of inclusivity ends there. It just ends there. I appointed this, and Moi did it. Kenyatta did it. Those who came after them did it. So to demonstrate that you're detribalized, you can point at box ticking. Look at my government. You can see this person from this. Well, that's crass. That's superficial. Let's talk about inclusivity in terms of equitable allocation of state resources. That's what it is. Allocation of the benefits of modernity. Allocations of opportunities for upward mobility. That's inclusivity. That you can apply for a job in Kenya and your surname will not count. They will interview you, give you a job because you qualify, because you didn't know anybody there. That's inclusivity. But if you have to talk to some cabinet minister or some permanent secretary or whichever. No, it's not. That is instrumentalization of identity, and in this case, ethnicity. Get it clearly. And therefore, the likes of Mwai Kibaki were constitutional delinquents. If you listen to what the previous speakers have said, constitutional delinquents, because they could tell it was a rational kind of way of looking at things. They could tell that, affirming the rule of law and the constitution means you lose something. If you're a head of state, you lose something. You submit yourself to the law and you lead by example. You let go of your allies who are found to have contravened the law. They can go to jail. You are not going to ask Kenyans, alikula mbuzi ya nani, when people are asking for accountability vis-a-vis David Miraria, your cabinet minister. You will not ask them so disdainfully like that. You will say, fall on your sword. So that is the problem we have, Joe. Secondly, Wendy asked about language. Wendy, there's no people that I know of that has been able to build a lasting, enduring civilization without affirming their unique identity.
Oh my, seems like we are losing Western. I don't know whether it's me. Oh, okay.
I've lost him. I can't hear him either.
Can I just say something, please?
Western, are you still there? Araha, just Western, are you still there? Okay, as Western prepares sorts out his connection issues, I want to bring in Araha. But Araha, before I bring you in, Obeds, I don't know whether you are a Rumba fanatic. I think Miss Ella is a Rumba fanatic, and I can bet with you on that, at whatever cost it is. I can see one Fred Obachi Machoka in the house. Fred, I'll give you a chance to speak. Let me give Araha first before we can talk about some Rumba kidogo. Araha, let me give you a chance to speak. Take the mic.
Yeah, first of all, I'm happy to see my former colleague.
Hello, the real Joe. Where?
I'm happy to see my former colleague Ikuru explaining most of the things, and also Neto, an MP during those days. First of all, where did the rain started beating Kenya? The day we allowed 2 ICC indicted individuals to vie for the presidency against Chapter 6, which really said that anybody who have been indicted should not be anywhere close to public office. Why did we do that? One, the CJ at that time, one Mutunga, who really failed this country, because that was the last, defender of the Constitution. He should not have allowed them to vie for the presidency, and he allowed them. Worse still, that particular election was contested. What did he do again? A 13-minute rule that allowed these 2 individuals to legitimately govern this country. And from that time, this constitution continued to be mutilated, because for one was a team leader for the no, and the other one was also a lukewarm watermelon. And out of respect for Kibaki, the late, may he rest in peace, is, he didn't come out, and I'm talking about Uhuru, he didn't come out purely no, he was lukewarm. He was a watermelon, out of respect for Kibaki. But we had a Mr. No, who is our current, president, totally against it. So what do you expect, Kenyans? We made our bed. Please let us learn to do what? Sleep on it. However, uncomfortable it is because because of ethnicity, negative ethnicity again, we supported these guys. And you know what they're doing? They're peeing on us. So don't blame about the constitution. Which is more expensive? Corruption, $2 billion shillings a day, or a constitution that should have been followed in the letter and spirit will have been much cheaper than the corruption that we experience at all levels. At all levels, national, regional, whatever, county governments. Kenyans, whoever cast us must be smiling somewhere because of our tribalism, negative ethnicity, and having allowed, two communities to rule for the last 61 years or 62 years. The level of entitlement.
Araha,
The man eat man.
sorry, Araha. I give you
Yeah.
I give you a minute to land your point. Then
Yeah, I'm actually going to sleep because what I'm hearing is a lot of hogwash from Kenyans, blaming this and that. When the whole issue is us, let us look ourselves in the mirror and see whether you're a Kenyan first, or you're a Luo first, or you're a Kikuyu. Because learn something from Tanzania, where all the presidents come from minorities, from Nyerere to Hassan Mwingi to wherever, to the current Suluhu. But here you cannot even allow a Turkana, a Somali, Amdigo to become president because of some stupid, primitive, archaic mentality that, we are the majority. Come on. Kenyans are still living in the Neanderthal, how is it pronounced? Neanderthal, or whatever it's called, age. I'm sorry to say. Good night.
Thank you, Araha. Thank you. Weston, you had not landed your point. I'm gonna give you just 2 minutes or so to land your points. You dropped. Then I think we are looking at how to wind up. We were supposed to wind up by 10:30, but sometimes the conversation gets sweeter or so. And also, I wish to also tell the speakers on the panel, we'll give you time to give your final submissions as well. So Weston, I give you 2 minutes to land your point so that you.
Well, thanks, the real Joe. Joe, the just speaker was spoken, and brings me to the point I wanted to raise vis-a-vis Migai about parliamentary system in a highly politically unstable system such as ours. Now, there's something called minority veto. When you read that scholar, he referenced Arend, this system called consensationalism. What it means is that you have to give the El Molo, the Taraka, and those other minority ethnic groups in Kenya veto powers. What it means, if there is... Joe, can you still hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
You have to give those minority ethnic groups veto power, so that if you bring a bill or a motion in parliament, because they don't have the numbers and it's going to hurt the interest, they can veto it. Are we ready for that? We are not. When people say, oh, Kindiki Kidure comes from a community of, I don't know how many, 240,000 votes. So we're still disdainful to people because they don't come from the so-called populous communities, which, as it is, I agree with the previous speaker, that kind of politics is atavistic. It's extremely anachronistic. We shouldn't be entertaining it. So I putting it to the likes of Ekuru. When I talk about the politics of the day, the exigencies of the day trumping good intentions, as encapsulated under the rule of law and the Constitution, that's exactly what I mean. And therefore, Wendy, as I land, It doesn't mean if somebody speaks English is detribalized or French or Spanish. It doesn't mean that. We tend to think like that in Kenya. In fact, one of the ways of promoting social cohesion, I dare say, we have to even ensure that these local languages, indigenous language, are studied from grade 0 up to tertiary. That is it. And that's why when Rigathi speaks in his mother tongue, in Nairobi, the heart of a cosmopolitan area, people become suspicious what his messaging is all about. But if people were to learn that language is using, well, they wouldn't suspect that he is into some dog whistling politics. And that's why, of the presidents we have had to date, Jomo Kenyatta spoke in his mother tongue publicly. Daniel Moi did not for 24 years. You're not going to get any clip in which Daniel Moi spoke publicly in his mother tongue. Mwai Kibaki did it. Uhuru Kenyatta did it liberally. We're yet to see William Ruto. Why is it a problem? It's a problem because when you do that and you hold that office, apex office, it betrays lack of appreciation of ethnic sensibilities and how ethnicity has been instrumentalized to discriminate, to incorporate, to make people be consigned to the margins in spite of their qualifications and potentials. But if we were to talk about this, frame it in the Constitution, then we'll know how to go about it, how we can go about it in terms of scholarship, epistemically. How do we ensure that Kenyans become polyglots? They can speak as many languages as they can, and therefore we can understand one another. So Wendy, in South Africa, where people can speak as many languages and the Constitution affirms all the languages to be official, the country is not more ethnically divided than we are, who only speak in Swahili and English, because language is not the issue. It is the politics that is the issue. Bad politics just means that. You can't cure it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Weston. Thank you. And actually, I'm going to do the research. I'm going to look for evidence, and I bring evidence kwa kalatas, as we say it, about Moi speaking his language. I'm going to do that research. But yeah, we are winding up the space. I see Obed, your hand is up. I don't know what mistake I have committed, but let me.
You haven't. You've done an excellent job. I don't punish people. What I'm trying to do is, Dr. Ikuru had asked that we land at 10:30, or we close the space at 10:30, or I'd ask what time we close. Because Dr. this was your request and this was your space per se. How much longer can we stretch you so that we don't waste your time?
Actually, no. I think I need to go because I have to prepare for a trial tomorrow. I've got 2 hearings.
Okay.
So I may not stay longer. I just need to make my final comments, and then I think I can leave you guys to go on.
I think I would allow you that leverage because you've really been gracious to us. We would allow you to speak. Would you have let us allow Uncle to greet you before you make your final
Okay.
remarks?
Yes, obviously. Yeah, anytime. Let's listen to Obachi, Uncle Bachi.
Okay. Uncle Fred, you have a chance to us. Uncle Fred? I'm not so sure Uncle Fred can hear us. Can you hear us? Or is it me that can't hear him?
No, he's not talking. I can see his mic is on, but I don't think he's muted.
Uncle, you probably have to sort your mic issues and then
you can probably drop then come back. Yeah,
so we'll allow Daktari to give his final remarks, and then we can see how we round up the space.
Okay. First of all, let me just say, I mean, on a very light touch, Weston, you can't describe us as the likes of. That's a bit derogatory. I hope going forward, we are not the likes of. You can just say, I want to address a Kuru Aukot in that tone. Now, my final comments are these. The question of values in any society is also a question of leadership. I remember my days back in the UK as a student. during Tony Blair's premiership. The health, I think the NHS, they call it, was so overstretched. And Tony Blair, I think, commissioned a study where he established that it was the bad eating habits of the British people not exercising that was actually overstretching the NHS. And he spoke about it as a leader, and he told them, listen, we need to change our lifestyles. Obesity was actually affecting the healthcare system. And so sometimes when we talk about values in a society, it's about the kind of leadership that we have. How is that leadership maybe moralizing, living the example of the kind of society that we want? So when you have, for example, got positions under the constitution of Kenya, how are you behaving yourself in the holding of that office? If you look at, for example, William Ruto's cabinet, the first one particularly, you had all manner of characters, appointed. People who were charged with murder, rape, very serious offenses, taking up office. But it's also about the Kenyan society. We don't really interrogate our leadership. It looks like Kenyan leadership attracts the most deplorables. And therefore, that becomes the definition of what kind of society that we are. When I listen to many people, especially people like Western, be so critical about the Kenyan society, I feel like someone like Western is speaking from a point of utopia, because we have perfected the art of lamentation, but we actually do nothing about it. Let me tell you, Western, I participated in the 2017 presidential election and also went round in the 2019 when I was promoting the Punguza Mizigo. I can tell you this for a fact. We can lament on these spaces. We can talk, call them names, so long as we don't offer ourselves to be the alternative leaders in this country. They don't really care. They love it that way, that we remain that way. We can criticize them. But the moment you go into their space, and this is exactly what we did at Third Way Alliance Kenya, when we promoted the Punguza Mizigo Constitutional Amendment Bill, and we got 1.2 million signatures to promote that bill, it became a threat to BBI. And they came glaring. They even tried to take away our political party. So we can talk to each other. We can be curious onlookers. And I'll refer you to a very interesting passage by a guy called Bertolt Brecht, talking about the political illiterates. A lot of us here are political illiterates because we are just fence sitters. So I think we need to get involved in the governance of our country. And the moment we get involved, that's when these people will know. You see, the Gen Z movement, in a way, shook them. Actually, a friend of mine told me that in State House, guys were scared, especially when the Gen Zs were saying, we are storming that State House. I think Ruto and his team were thinking about Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Burkina Faso, that will this also happen to us? So again, I would say that. But to Western, I think you need to read Article 204 of the Constitution of Kenya. Equality is an ideal, but I think equity is the kind of attribute we're talking about here. Article 204 talks about equalization fund, and I think it is symbolically because of the nature and character of our leadership. That's why we crafted Article 130 of the Constitution of Kenya, because the character of our society is that we want to see one of our own in government. That's why you can see the fight between Gachagua and Ruto. What stopped Ruto from picking, say, for example, Aboni as a running mate, or somebody from Lamu, or a Bajuni? He had to pick a Kikuyu because he knows that Kikuyu will bring a block vote that will make him the president. But he doesn't believe in that partnership. So that is just the character of our leader. We have to be realistic about what our society is all about. Lastly, I would say that the Constitution of Kenya 2010 is just but a piece of paper. It may not be what the paper is written on if we don't live it, if we don't breathe life to it. So it's up to us to live the Constitution. It's up to us to call for accountability. If you look at Article 3, it requests of all of us that we have the duty to respect, uphold, and protect the Constitution, protect the Constitution. So let's not leave it to the political class. By now, if you live in Kenya, even if you live outside but you are Kenyan, you ought to know that there is political conmanship going on. Politics in Kenya has become a business. It's been commercialized, and it's become a business of the few. That's why in my conversation with you tonight, I started by acknowledging the fact that we have got an elite capture of the state. Today, some nondescript individuals are actually the face of leadership in this country. While many of us here who can spend over 2 hours, 2 hours and 45 minutes on space, X space, speaking about our country, but we are not involved. They don't care. So long as we are curious onlookers and fence sitters, for them, let Ekura Court, the Western, the Mizanis, and the Obeds make noise on social media. So long as they don't come into our space, hiyo ni shauri yao. I think with those final remarks, I will stop it there. I know this is not a conversation that we can complete today. It should be an ongoing conversation, by the way, until we get it right. Thank you very much, and good night
Thank you
all.
so much. Thank you so much, Daktari. Very wonderful listening to you, and thank you for offering yourself to to drive this conversation today. You're welcome to our Sunday schooling again when you have an opportunity. But what you speak to is very true. Those of us who are seated here, and I think I've said this thing severally as well, that we have these conversations, sound very intelligent, but we do not want to offer ourselves for positions of leadership. And as long as we do that, it's going to be difficult to remove the system. We must be the change that we want to see, and we must get in there in the ring. This thing of looking for a Messiah, to try and solve our problems is never going to happen. Thank you so much for your time. We wish you all the best.
And by the way, let me just say one final thing. You see, when I offered myself to run for president of Kenya in 2017, you know, the people who criticized me the most are actually my contemporaries. They're asking me, Ekuru, are you crazy? Are you mad? I mean, you are just a Turkana. How many are you? So for them, it's like I was going to be a president of Turkana. Do you have the money? That's the extent to which our country is actually sliding back. We are not even seeing the fact that as Kenyans, regardless of how small your tribe is or where you come from, the Constitution protects all of us in equal measure. We don't acknowledge that. We look at numbers. We look at, you come from what region. So unfortunately, we are actually the authors of our own misfortune when we decide we are not participating. I think we really need to participate in our governance structure, and that's the only way we can try to change things. It is possible, guys. It's very possible. When we as Third Way Alliance Kenya went to support the Raila Odinga petition against Uhuru Kenyatta, it was actually the audit done by Third Way Alliance Kenya, and I'm not blowing our trumpet here. It was the audit done by Third Way Alliance Kenya that actually, nullified the election, because we fought the old question of transmission of results, while Uhuru Kenyatta and Ruto wanted Raila to go to the counting of votes because they knew they had the numbers, the tribal numbers. But when we attacked the transmission of results, we contributed in our own small way. And of course, I know ODM stole the show. They say that they're the ones who nullified. Fair enough. We made our contribution. But the question I'm putting across is that let's participate, guys. Let's stop this lamentation and complaining. We offer ourselves to be those leaders.
Daktari, can you hear me now? Anybody?
Yes, we can hear you, Uncle.
Yeah, Daktari, before you leave, thank you for being bold enough to seek presidency in this country. I wish that the people that we find on X and or other social media platforms were actually the voters. Unfortunately, voting in this country is done by those people who are the Juakali guys, people in the slums, and what I can call the less privileged, because they are motivated by money to go and vote. A lot of us on these platforms here can't withstand the rain. We don't vote. If we were to vote online, I think we could have had the president that we wanted. Unfortunately, we can't, and we don't. The Kenyan Constitution, a lot of people say, from a pedestrian's viewpoint, and I believe I am pedestrian in this context, they say it is the perfect constitution if implemented. The question is, if implemented by who? So you find that the executive was given all the powers of implementation. They were given the money and the enforcers. And the only people to check these powers are the other two arms of government, that is the judiciary and parliament. But these arms of government, again, rely on the executive for financing. When you look at voter education, which again can only help the less informed understand that they got power in their hands to get the government they want, you find that again, voter education requires money. Who has the money? Again, it is the executive. And it is through voter education that we can arrest the Mutuetu syndrome. It is through voter education that we can help our people understand that leaders are not necessarily politicians. Because if you go to the rural area and you say we are waiting for leaders, people think you're waiting for an MCA, you are waiting for
We lost Uncle Fred. Yeah, Uncle Fred, if you can hear us,
yes.
we can't hear you.
Oh no.
We lost you.
Can you hear me now?
Uncle Fred,
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's okay now.
Yes, we can.
I was saying, I don't know where at what point you lost me, but I was saying that voter education requires money. And who has the money again? It is the executive. It is through voter education that we can arrest, yani tuzuie or eliminate this perception kwamba mtu wetu akipewa kazi, therefore sisi pia tumepata. It is through voter education that we can help our people waelewe kwamba leaders are not necessarily watu wa siasa, kwa sababu ukienda mahali useme unangoja viongozi, people will think unangoja MCA, unangoja women rep, unangoja MP, unangoja senator ama governor. So what I'm trying to say is these powers of executing what is in the constitution bado iko kwa the executive. And the only way we can get to implement the constitution, which was written fairly well, is if that constitution again had gone the extra mile to put the laws in place. Unfortunately, it doesn't do that. The laws that now implement whatever it is that we want, the laws, for example, that have got the final say on chapter 6, where tunasema huyu mtu alipelekwa kotini ama huyu mtu ameiba, hata kama haijakuwa proven beyond reasonable doubt, huyu mtu is of suspicious characters, watu ambao wameua na tunajua kwamba someone actually died in their hands. These people should have not been given a chance. But somehow there was ambiguity that was created by this constitution that is going to take us a long time for us to execute. Thank you.
Thank you, Uncle Fred. I do not know whether, Daktari, you have something to say in regard to that, especially on the part of creating laws, that, deal with ambiguity in law. But I think he puts across a very valid point that the power for implementation and, ensuring that the Constitution is followed partially still goes back to the executive. So, and that makes things a bit difficult. I don't know what you have to say about that, other than if you have not much, then probably go back to the others on this speaker to hear what they say. I think Dr. cannot hear us. So, Joe, confirm you can hear me?
Yes.
Eli, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, great. Okay, great. So what we do, because they're also running out of time, I'd allow the people on the speaker, Western, I'd give you a minute, 2 minutes or 3 minutes for you to make your final remarks. I'm not so sure, Dr.
Please, Obed, may I please be excused now, please?
No problem, Dr. By all means, thank you very much for spending your time with us. This has really been good.
I can also see my professor Kivula Kibwana is already joined us, so maybe you can give him a chance to say one or two things on the Constitution.
No problem. We'll have him come.
All right. Good night. Good night, everybody. I'm sure we'll see you again soon.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you so much. So I'll allow Western 5 minutes. Western, I don't know if has he dropped. Oh yeah. Western, I'll allow you 5 minutes to canvass your issue as we look at winding down and closing the space, because we've also taken a lot of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eli. I appreciate the submissions and contributions that so far we've listened to. As I said at the beginning, if we stop dialoguing, then we slide into anarchy. It's important to dialogue. It's one way of having a national conversation about pressing issues bedeviling us. One thing I wish to say is that there is no such a thing as a cookie cutter approach to problems, be it at a personal level, at a societal level, or at a political level. As we have to figure out how to devise our measures, mechanisms, ways, and means of surmounting these problems we keep talking about. And my fear is that we tend to think that there is some magic wand. You know, for instance, I ask myself, why would we come up with the word county? What was the problem with the word district? Why would we come up with the deputy president? What was the problem with the vice president? What was it? What was the problem with the province? Those are things that, you know, they look small, almost inconsequential, but they go to the core of a philosophy of a particular country, the uniqueness of a particular country. And it's why I'm referring to this a flawed notion of a cookie cutter approach. That because something worked somewhere, is going to work in our case. It's not true because there's no one size fits all. Secondly, the Rigathi Gachagua saga keeps me thinking very deeply, keeps me introspecting almost on a daily basis. For the simple reason that if anything was to stand out as far as this constitution is concerned, it was the question, the aspect of probity, of values, of ethics. Those things that you may look at and they look very intangible. There are things you can't see, but like oxygen, you realize how important it is when it's not there. When it's there, you take things for granted. So these values, there are things you don't see. You cannot visualize them. You cannot put a price tag on them, but they are extremely priceless. They're extremely invaluable. And if you are to go to a country and look at this country and say, wow, why does this country look like this? More often than not, it's about those things that are not even spelled in the Constitution, that you don't even find written elsewhere. But people have them, they've internalized them, they've made them part and parcel of their lives, both in private and in public. But in Kenya, I'm afraid it's important to have a constitution. It's important to invoke the rule of law. It's important even to memorize the various articles in the constitution. But fundamentally, is as to whether the spirit of that constitution finds traction in people's hearts and lived experiences. And my fear from the Rigathi Gachagua saga is that we are far away from that. And that's why there's this contradiction of a country that seems to be democratizing, seems to be consolidating. If you look at the number of elections we have had since the advent of the third wave of multi-party politics in the early 90s to date, but we're highly liberal in the sense that we're intolerant towards one another. We're intolerant to diversity. were intolerant to dissent, were intolerant to uniqueness and difference. And those aspects are not concomitant with a society that wants to move forward as a collective. Secondly, we differ a lot to our political elite. I'm afraid that's problematic. We differ a lot. We think that so much so that our own collective well-being does not count. Once a political figure is embattled, we think we have the moral duty, we are morally obliged to run to the rescue of that individual. Why? Because of this primordial politics, trying to identify on the basis of fairly anachronistic, basis. From my community, went together in the same school, from my church, those kind of things. They take us nowhere. And therefore, the 2010 Constitution is still far from finding traction, much as it may look lofty. As I learned, I'll put it to, and even if Ekuru is not here, that the Constitution was vulgarized in Naivasha by the political elite. They mutilated it. They bastardized it. So they gave us a very inferior version of what we deserved. Very inferior version. But we had fought. We are almost, falling into the abyss, going by the 2007, 2008 post-election violence. So we're desperate for something. It had been a protracted process, as I said. A lot had been lost. But what we do, as far as changing it is concerned, that is the conundrum. Because again, the very, very individuals who vulgarized it in Naivasha are waiting in the wings. We give them the green light to amend it, and guess what? They will have their way. They will have their way. They will amend those provisions that will satisfy their parochial interests. They will not be interested in the popular aspirations of the people of Kenya. That's my fear. If we were to open that window for amendment, we will again gonna go back to the independence constitution that was arbitrarily amended to the extent that it could not be recognized. So, Eli, Mizani, the real Joe, thanks for the opportunity. We have to dialogue. The constitution is as good as the values, norms, traditions that undergird the society within which this constitution is expected to function. Good night.
Thank you, Weston. Thank you for taking your time being here. I would request that you guys allow me to give Professor Kibwana an opportunity to make a contribution. And where I come from, Professor Kibwana, you're not late. If you found us eating, you don't talk badly about us. Uncle Fred can confirm that. That's what they say. So I give Prof you 5 minutes to make your opening and closing remarks as we look at probably ending the space in the next 15 minutes latest. Thank you very much. Karibu sana, Prof.
Thank you, Eli, Mizani. Thank you, everybody. Sorry, I've been struggling to come into the space because my tablet is not working and I had to borrow some other gadget. And so I say hi to everybody. And because I've come late and I'm coming to the table late, I'll be careful because I'm sure a lot of stuff has been discussed. So I listened to the real Joe at the very end. And what I can say about the making of the Constitution 2010, including its subsequent implementation, is the long struggle of making the Constitution, for me, since 1969, after Oginga Odinga was removed from kind of active political scene. So that making making of the constitution from that time, one can say that the political elite, whether it is the independence constitution, whether it is the 2010 constitution, it is not their cup of tea. It is not what they feel comfortable implementing, because even the independence constitution as was, with the regionalism, with the division of resources and all that, even that, and the fundamental rights and all that, if it had been implemented without the changes that were made, then that, like in Botswana, it could have, been a good beginning for us. But even at Lancaster, the three Lancasters, they said that, okay, Kanu, which was dominant, said that we are going to accept it for purposes of independence, but subsequently we will change it to be what we want. And if you look at the 2010 constitution as well, there was a lot of resistance. Actually, even towards the very end of making it, still there were the hawks who said that it's not necessary to have even this constitution. But they were told, because of the fights that there'd been 2007-8, if you don't have this constitution, you'll have a revolution. So it was in many ways, even as it is applauded as being one of the most progressive constitutions, those who are in charge actually just wanted to have like a stopgap measure, so to speak. And so when one actually looks at 1964, when the changes of the independence constitution began, up to 1991, when we retained multipartism once more, there were about 30 constitutional changes, which completely destroyed the independence constitution. And what is happening from 2010, just to go back a little, 1964 to 1991, the changes were through constitutional amendments. But now, 2010 onwards, the changes actually, interestingly, to the constitution and constitutional changes through ordinary legislation. And there is this new thing of changing the constitution through private members' bills. So that actually looks like it's not the state doing it, but it is private members, but they are sponsored to do so. And so we have these unconstitutional changes through legislation, ordinary legislation, and like destroying devolution, bringing all sorts of very funny things. So I think the main issue is to say, even this 20 constitution, how do people protect it so that it is not, first of all, changed recklessly through, going to courts and all that, if, we are contesting any of those, supposed changes, so that at least there is something we can say, you can't do this because the constitution says no. So that even as they do illiberal things and so on, at least one can say this, like the Gen Zs, you can't do this. You have to be, the constitution says you have to be transparent, you have to be accountable, you have to do it right. So I think those are the two parallels I wanted to make, actually, to say how the changes happened from 64 to 1991 was through constitutional changes. How they're happening now is through unconstitutional ordinary legislation. And of course, as was rightly pointed out by Real Joe, they now want to change the constitution again, because they want to, you can't have a prime minister without changing the constitution. You can't have deputy prime ministers, because they want to be able to create positions where they can say, you representative of this ethnic group, you representative of this ethnic group, let's come together and share power now. Somebody will be speaker, somebody of Senate, somebody of the National Assembly, somebody will be prime minister, somebody will be deputy prime minister, two of them, somebody will be a president, a deputy president. So actually, all these fights of from BBI, NADCO, a lot of the real thing is that executive, how it is to be configured to accommodate ethnic barons. And it is true that if you don't have the values which are in the constitution, so there is a tug of war between what the constitution says and what people are doing. Like in other places, you go and queue, you don't jump a queue, you don't double overtaking, you do those things that say that this is a humanizing society. And those are things that we are still struggling with. They are in the constitution, but because there isn't leadership which is nudging us towards, those kinds of values and saying that this is what the law says, this is the rule of law. And even as people say that the deputy president, even when, even if you don't like him, we don't like him because, he's part of the whatever. But it is saying that do whatever you want to do, but following the law. So that for even, people are being evicted, you say follow the law. For, the people being abducted, follow the law. So I think that also for me is an important thing. And so I think my time is up. Maybe the people are not ready for this constitution because the leadership is not taking us that way. But we have to. This is what we have, and we must insist that it must be followed. And when it will be changed, it will be because there is a leadership that changes it positively, like the gender, the two-thirds gender principle and all that, and we do it, the correct way, and hopefully, there's going to be a leadership in the near future which is committed to changing this constitution, because the leaderships that have been there are not leaderships that really, they have consistently not really wanted a more progressive society. And now we're even sliding into, those Kanu days, and we shouldn't do that. And thank you very much. Sorry, I was struggling. I'd been told that this is very important X space, and I was struggling to get in, but I'm happy at least I've had this moment to say something. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. At least you've had a bite of what we had. And very good contribution, actually, a very good reflection on what you've put out there, which gives perspective to how it's been. And you quite correctly put it that there's been a tug of war for a long time. And here it's a question of the capacity of the people who are in charge to lead and direct Kenya a certain way. I think what Julius Nyerere did for Tanzania, leading from the front, what we keep talking about Lee Kuan Yew, who guided Singapore to what it is. We keep dreaming and talking about Singapore when it comes to imagination and copying things, but when it comes to doing what they did, we don't. Eli, I take it back to you as we close the space. I think I've said this so many times.
Just give me a second. As one of the drafters of the Constitution, myself, rest assured, Prof. Is he still there, Professor Kivuda?
Yeah, he's there.
The late chairman of the Committee of Experts, Kitonga, reassured us as we were drafting this Constitution, it will be self-protecting. Remember, the BBI failed. NATCO is about to fail. And this Cherer guy, is it the guy who is bringing this 7-year term president, MPs, up to the MCS, is going to fail. And I want to reassure you all, sleep well. This constitution is self-protecting. And that is the legacy of the late Gitonga. May his soul rest in peace. So I'm not worried. As one of the drafters, I was the only non-lawyer in a room full of lawyers. And my role was to ensure that we all agreed what Kenyans wanted. And this is exactly what Kenyans wanted. The constitution is cheap. It's not expensive. What is expensive is corruption, 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 and tribalism. Somebody wearing a 10 million shilling watch is in office, public office, for heaven's sake. When people are dying of hunger in northeastern Turkana and even some previously, resourced areas. Anyway, let me not take long, but fellow Kenyans, sleep well. Don't worry about this constitution. It will protect itself. Good night.
Thank you, Araha. Very good. Mizani, if you can hear me.
Sure, Obed, and thank you so much for steering the conversation alongside our good friend, the real Joe. We unfortunately must come to the end of the conversation, so we'll take quick remarks from the already available speakers. I know the data analyst, rather activist, had questioned us and requested to put a quick question to Professor Kivuda. I'll allow him a minute to make the question. If possible, take it, please. Data activist.
Thank you, Eli, and to everyone. I thank you for taking the time. Um, Mine is a quick one to Prof. He holds a very unique position, having been a former governor and him being a law professor. As to those of you who know, those who don't, we usually do county spaces where we look at Office of Control of Budget reports, which we use for civic education in the various counties. So my question to Professor would be, in these reports, usually the control of budget gives recommendations of what the county executive needs to do to fix the various situations that result. But we find that the law is not followed. Yeah, they don't follow it, and it's clearly stated which laws that they need to follow when executing certain recommendations that control of budget has made. So my question to you would be, how can we, the people, hold the county executive accountable? What action can we take to ensure that the law is followed? Is it doing an audit, a citizen audit, or what exactly can we do? And for context, I can read one of the recommendations that are found in most of the reports, and I quote: "The government requires that salaries be processed through the IPPD system, and the county is advised to fast track the acquisition of unified personnel numbers for their staff. The County Public Service Board should regulate staff engagement on contract and casual workers as provided under Section 74 of the County Governments Act 2012. Further, strict compliance with the approved staff establishment should be maintained." So, Prof, please give us a perspective of you when you were a governor and also as a law professor. Thank you.
Maybe I'll take the final submission from the rest of the speakers before we can actually have Prof to give that as his final kicker. I will allow Wendy. Wendy, you've been a good student today. You have contributed equally. Would love to get your final remarks. Kindly, the mic is yours. A minute and a half.
Hi, thanks, Eli. And I think I wanted to speak to Western and answer, but like Ekuru Coach already spoke to the ethnic issue. It's about equity. And I think he said he articulated it well, that no one is stopping anyone from speaking their ethnic language. It's more about equity. So how do we include small communities? And so Western, again, there's the need to recognize, as I said, to recognize ethnicity, but not for grounded. So you'd mentioned South Africa, and I think as a national leader speaking your ethnic language, maybe you should reconsider that. But anyway, about people keep saying we don't have a culture and what are our values. I think going back to our ancestors, the Mau Mau, I just finished reading a grain of it. Please don't tell my mom, because I was supposed to read it years ago. But then, so we are the land of free men and women. Of course, me being a feminist scholar, we're the land of free men and women. And our cries for freedom sent shivers even to a small island in Bioko, now Equatorial Guinea. And so I think that has remained consistent even with the Gen Z movement now. Our cries for freedom. We are the land of the free. And and perhaps I should land at that, because and maybe as I land again, I'll proudly say I was Professor Migai's student. Okay, now I land. Bye.
You never cease to amaze us. I expected you'd say you were a student to Professor Kivuta here, but Professor Migai is equally a good professor of the law. Let's get any final remarks from, I'm convoluted here. Uncle Fred Obachi Machoka, thank you for making time to be here. As a very veteran broadcaster, we celebrate you. But as you questioned about who gets to decide how our constitution is implemented, you also have your own voice to add. You've questioned why we have a lot of young people advocating on X and they never get to vote. How do we translate this X energy to the X on the ballot? Obachi.
I think this is a result of frustration, because when I look at I'm slightly old, so I've seen I've watched the political space a while. I've watched the political space when Honorable Ruto and the team were talking about being vijana wa kidijitali. And then I've seen them grow old, and then we have had people like Babu Owino and people like Ndindi Nyoro, young people coming in, and so on and so forth. I think the voter is frustrated because every time they bring in young tax, so to speak, to represent them in parliament, where people assume that is where there is leadership. Like I said, to a pedestrian thinker or the guy in the streets, a leader ni mwanasiasa. Then you find that the people who are voted in as young people who are supposed to think independently and probably not spring this tribal card end up being assimilated into the system. I don't know, Kibuda Kibwana might help us. What happens in that parliament is like there is a curse that anybody who gets to parliament stops thinking. So you find that once these people have been absorbed into that same status quo, then people feel like we are not having any changes. So what I can only encourage people to do is that within your small space, whether it is you and your wife and children, or you and your mother, or you and your husband, let there be a conversation about how we can change Kenya so that we become like few clusters. And when all these clusters get to combine and we are thinking the same way, probably we can make changes. Otherwise, if we go a bit global, we may never change anything. We are being frustrated, and some of us in our small space, we try and say what we think people should do. And the only keyword here is integrity. That do what you think should be done within your space without anybody looking and without you demanding to be applauded for doing the right thing. I tell people, do good for no good reason. That's my mantra on air. But I want that teacher to also teach his children that it is good to do good. And it is even better to be seen to be doing good, even if you don't get applauded for it. Thank you.
You know, Uncle Fred, I would have released you because of age, but I realize you also love life. When are you inviting us to the ranch? Because how much is your capacity?
Our capacity is up to about 1,500. We can actually have many
Awesome.
people at the
You know
ranch.
why I
Yes.
asked you that? I will ask Obeds to tell you why I asked you that. Obeds, please now shine and show you know how to speak.
No, you're being a bully. But Uncle, I went to school with your son, and we played together. He was our striker for a long time. He's invited me a lot of times. It's me who's failed to come. So now, Eli, you happy I've revealed the truth?
Tell Uncle about the upcoming event, because we might just want to switch.
Well, we're having a conference. We're looking at having a conference on in the month of March next year. We did one this year, but we want to do one that's different. It's not your ordinary kind of conference that we talk about. We want to use something called open space technology, where you have kind of like an X space in the open where you get to see people physically. and you have people sitting in different areas, different conversations going on, and you're able to move within from one point to another depending on the conversation that's being held, then people can vote on what they agree, and then we can see how we put traction to that, because we want to come up with something that is tangible and can be followed. I'm sure it's nothing different, but want to do it differently than what other people have done. The concept paper is out, and you can check our contacts on mizani254.org, our website. At the bottom, how to contact us, and we'll be happy. We're looking for people to collaborate with so that we make this a reality, and we'll be happy to engage. Mizani, think I've done that?
Awesome. And just one thing that was left out, we are hosting an event, and that is the conference. The theme is purpose-driven leadership. And we are not just doing it on X, Uncle Fred. And therefore, if we can have a sideline conversation, I will be happy to see if we will come to the ranch. Maybe we can eat more ostrich. Thank you for
Yes.
being here. We appreciate you.
Karibu, thank you.
Asante sana. Now let's move to the next final speaker, and Western, we will give you one more chance to make your really final remarks and overview of the conversation we had. Please.
Thank you, Eli. Eli, Wendy, probably she doesn't get me. Wendy, I'm averse to ethnic balkanization, very, very much so. And therefore, what I'm saying is, I'm inviting the Kenyan political elite and you and me and everybody else not to be ashamed of who we are. It's not the diversity of Kenya that renders Kenya politically unstable. It is the political elite who, instead of harnessing the diversity of the country, elects to exploit it for parochial power and economic ends. So if you teach people their mother tongue, their local languages, you're not balkanizing the society. The Japanese speak Japanese. Koreans speak their language. You can go on and on. In China, they speak their languages. That doesn't make them any less globally competitive. So you can, borrow selectively from elsewhere, but you do not borrow while you look down upon what is yours, which is what we do. So Wendy, Peter Eke, a Nigerian social scientist, in an article written way back in 1975, you can look for it, Colonialism and the Two Publics, argues that one of our enduring challenges in Africa is that we become extremely nervous and jittery every other time we find falling short of the so-called international standards. You find in most African universities, they will do things, and when you ask them, why do you do these things? The answer would be, these things are being done in Harvard, in Oxford. There's no other justification. And you can see it even among our political elite. Why do you introduce an ID card that expires? It's done in Uganda, it's done elsewhere. We don't want a society like that. We must have justification for the things we do, because those things matter. Those things, we understand why we're doing them, not because somebody else is doing them. And therefore, heritage is important. Our cultures are important. Our languages are important. Our history is important. So that's the point I'm making. Eli, Mizani, and Obed, sincere appreciation once more. Let's keep talking. Talking, especially when you talk back to power. Power that is subverting the rule of law is an act of subversion. And that's why autocratic regimes proscribe freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, and many other civil liberties, because they don't want being talked back to. So we must continue talking. It's not doing nothing. It's where we begin by framing, our thoughts and our roadmap on what to do vis-a-vis our challenges. So it's not being cynical, as Akuru would put it. I would celebrate. If things are working, I celebrate. But if things are not working and I celebrate, That's delusional. That's being caught up in a cloud cuckoo land. We don't do that. In scholarship, we stick to facts. And through facts, then we can find a resolution to our challenges. Thank you so much. We'll keep talking. Pleasure. Good night.
Good night to you, Western Shilaho. I love the fact that there was something about cuckoo, and I was here about to start singing "Going Cuckoo." I remembered I eat that a lot in my meals. That activist had a question for Professor Kivuta Kibwana. Being a good professor, I'll give him 3 minutes probably to respond to the issue of holding the counties accountable when it comes to management of resources. Professor, your timer starts now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mizani, Obed, and Eli, and for all colleagues here. Let me very quickly say, how come like Uncle Fred, and that's a big name in our country, you know, when he says, what happens when people go into parliament, they go, through parties of other people, because the parties are owned. And so you are invited. And when you arrive there, you do what those who have been there do. And that is why even people are very positive. Whether it was Orengo, it was Anyang, initially they were thrown out. They were thrown out of, the political party, which belonged to somebody else. So, and that begs the question, when are we going to have actually what is truly a progressive, political representation, to some extent, like the way there is in South Africa, Kinamalema, I don't know about Umkhonto wa Sizwe, that kind of initially NC, initially, TANU, CCM. So that's really a question, that needs to be answered. And like during 1992, 1997, the opposition was fragmented and it got defeated by a minority of the votes that Moi got. So in the same way, if all these people, good people, are in next spaces who are crying for change of their country, the young people got killed, abducted, and all that. If this doesn't translate into a progressive movement so that there is a party or a coalition of parties that Kenyans can say, yes, this is now what you have been waiting for. Again, this will be wasted and we will do other XX spaces, maybe some other time after 2027. I think maybe when you discuss purpose-driven leadership in Machoka's ranch, Uncle Machoka's Fred's ranch, one thing that needs to be focused on is police reforms. Because actually, when the political elite discover that they're in a corner, they recourse to the police and they say we are going to increase the price, the salaries, and all that kind of stuff. And I think it's good that people read a novel called Glory by Violet Bulawayo. In that novel, actually, change begins to happen when the police say they're tired of killing people. They don't remember why they're killing them, killing relatives, killing whatever. So maybe that's something that could be discussed in that particular place. And very quickly, about X-Energy becoming X-Ballot. In the last elections, 8 million young people who were registered didn't vote. And about 3.3 or 4 million had not even registered when they're 18, even registered IDs. So, and now by 2027, another Gen Zs who are under 18 are going to be, 18 plus. So you're talking about 16 million young people. And if those young people, don't translate, their numbers into getting IDs, those who don't have, registering to vote, going to vote, talking to people to tell them that now, we must vote, we must really change, get people who are going to enforce this constitution, including ourselves, the young people. Then again, we are staring at, a dark future. And I liked what Ango Fred said about wherever you are, please organize there, like micro organizing for change. So that micro organizing eventually and soon is translated into macro organizing through that progressive movement that one talked about. And the languages of people are very important. People's cultures are very important, and maybe even the way to defeat this negative ethnicity is through talking, like, you know, what Ango Machoka, in the place where he works, where they have those stations, talking to people in their languages to tell them that don't keep on being cheated by these so-called kingpins and so on, who don't care about you but cheat you. They are caring about you. Like Gugi writes, you know, in Kikuyu, and many people read him who can't read English or Swahili, you know, are able to understand, you know, all the issues about how change is required to happen. So I think we need to be careful about bastardizing this, to say that this promote negative ethnicity. It's not them; it is the political people who thrive on that. And finally, the question of how come all these things, data activists and you know, how come all these recommendations don't see the light of day and they are disobeyed? And it is from the county assembly is supposed to be the first instance of correcting, holding accountable the county governments, the county executive. Then you go to Senate. Then you go to auditor, you know, general. Then there is also a controller of budget, and all those people, and they say, which, you know, do this because this law you have not done it. But there is general impunity. So when there's general impunity, and when these people know that they can compromise, people can, you know, take them to court and stuff, then, you know, some of these things will continue. But I like the question of citizen audit is so critical, because we tried it in Makwen, where from the village, people elected, and there was a people's government, which would, you know, be in charge of their projects. You couldn't be paid if they don't say yes. And, you know, we were getting to the stage of even summarizing those auditors' reports and stuff, and then getting them to ask people, how come, you know, you are not doing this and you're supposed to do it? So I really emphasize, apart from this layer of saying that there should be accountability as demanded by those institutions of government, independent institutions, but the citizen audit is so critical, because that is how Article 1 of the Constitution is enforced. And I think there's going to be a huge battle between the people and the leadership who want to subvert, you know, the livelihoods of people. And so I really encourage that activists, encourage all the people who are going that route to really continue to build, you know, something for the 1450 counties, so that those counties, you know, people know that they can't do monkey business and get away from it. Thank you very much, and good night. And I wish I was here at the beginning. This is really great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Kivuta. And I saw you signed up for a new job. You'll be giving lectures. So if you guys are planning to follow some law lectures, just hit up on Prof. He might be your next mwalimu. Mwalimu, there's a student here who has refused to go home. Na tumemalizana na school fees yake. Wendy, what is this you need to air out before we call it a night?
Thanks, Eli. I think as a student, maybe I just want Western to expound. Who is stopping you from speaking your language? Because you seem to be conflating issues here. We are very proud of our language and our culture, but who is stopping us from speaking our language? And please, like, relate that to cohesion, because maybe then I will be able to understand. Thanks.
All right, I will call that a rhetoric
for
one.
Wendy and Weston to finish this business.
You know, the lovely part about this, people have been requesting for their own spaces, and who are we? We offer those, right? So unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, we are late into the night. We realize you had a long holiday today if you're in Kenya. Unfortunately, Tuesday means it's back to work, and we have to let you go to take some rest before you resume your daily duties. Having said that, I will welcome the real Joe to make his final remarks, who was our co-host, followed by Obets, and then any final announcements. The real Joe, please.
Thank you very much, Eli and Obeds. We've had a very good conversation. I actually love the idea of hosting the conference at the ranch. I'm just gonna hold my horses as I also sharpen my teeth in case we have ostrich to eat. on that particular day. So I'm looking forward to that. But anyway, one thing I would like to say is, for me, I have a few issues. I have a few problems with our constitution on a few issues, and I'm glad Prof is still here. He can be able to hear some of these issues that I have. Article 145 was given to us in this constitution to be able to, whenever we lose confidence with the president, then he can be impeached. And this article gives that to the members of parliament. And that's where I have the problem. This article clearly states the grounds in which impeachment an impeachment motion can be brought to parliament: gross violation of our constitution, misconduct, and of course, if the president is believed to have contravened both international law and our laws locally. So I have a problem with, first of all, who determines this gross violation of our constitution? Because as I understand that article, it is supposed to be a member of parliament who brings that motion. So who determines that? I have that question. Number two, also, in yesterday's space, I had this problem with our political system, whereby the president of the Republic of Kenya is still the party leader, UDA. And therefore, how then would members of parliament under UDA be able to exercise Article 94 and 95, checking the president and reviewing the conduct of the president? How is that possible if you have your party leader as the president, your party leader, who can also whip you at the party level, again, is the same person you're supposed to review the conduct for? I have a problem again when it comes to Article 119. It gives us a right to petition parliament. And I would love to know if the people, because right now in the current political temperatures, the people have been talking about kufa makanga, kufa dereva. With Article 119, is it then possible? Because I've also seen online people ask, I mean, can we have one member of parliament just table that motion of impeachment? Is it possible that we, the people, can petition parliament to table a motion of impeachment against the president? These are some of the things that I'm conflicted about our constitution. And again, finally, Professor Migai talked about power dynamics. And I'm one of those people who believe power is balanced by power. For me, for this instance, for me, state power against the sovereign power of the people. So state power should be balanced by the sovereign power of the people. I got very concerned when I heard Dr. Ekuru say that Article 1 it is difficult to bring Article 1 to life. And he tried to insinuate about Article 108 in terms of recalling the president, the members of parliament, and things like that. I am one person who has believed that Article 1 stands on its own and it is not dependent on Article 108, because it therefore means balancing the state power with the sovereign power of the people. I wish Dr. Okot was here, but he will play the recording and be able to task him to answer these questions for me later on. But as I yield, the true cost of our constitution for me is not actually the cost of administration. I see it differently. Lack of service in terms of roads, healthcare. We have a new social health authority coming in with a rumor, and I'll say a rumor, with a rumor that it is supposed to bring to life Article 43, our socioeconomic rights. Yet we now have, with this process coming in place, we have people are unable to access healthcare directly against the same article they're claiming to bring to life. These are some of the things that we have as a problem in our constitution, and that is the true cost of our constitution for me. The true cost again for me is lack of development. When we don't have development, and in fact, another cost for me is other than corruption, and we talk about 680 billion a day and things like a year in loss to corruption, roughly 2 billion a day. Other than that, for me, again, the true cost of our constitution is when we have leadership that does not understand what it means to work for the people. That is the true cost for me, because if our leaders would understand that, then we would not have problems even with cost of administration and things like that. So as I land, I also want to encourage us, be the leader you wish you had. That is my encouragement to you. Good night, and I appreciate all of you who took your time to join our space today, and we've had a great conversation. I'm going to throw it back to you, Eli, so that we can conclude the space. Thank you very much, and I hope we get to eat the ostrich at the ranch. I'm sharpening my teeth, Eli. Thank you.
Thank you, the real Joe. I want to thank everyone who's taken their time to be here. It's really an honor to spend such a long time listening to us have this conversation. For those who are not able to come to the speaker and be able to give your contributions, and those who made your contributions on by comments, we are grateful for taking your time, because it also added value to this conversation. Auntie Rosemary, nice to see you. It's really been good. And I think, without belaboring the point, the reality that we face in this country is that we have very good. Kenya does not have a lack of laws. I think we are over legislated, if I may say that. The problem has always been having people who have fidelity to the law and who have the intention and desire to implement it. And partly because they are beholden to the fact that it's always about power and being able to control and have resources. I think what Professor Kagwanja calls the Happy Valley problem. So if we Kenyans, as we have we have an opportunity after every 5 years to vet these people. The problem is we've always appointed to leadership positions people who do not have the capacity or wherewithal to do that which is supposed to be done. And the reason is we are looking at people who have numbers in terms of they speak our language, also probably they talk like me, they do things like me, and because of that we're going to support them, or we do it out of pity. We are looking at a situation right now where the impeachment process for the DP hasn't been properly followed, and all of a sudden that we've whipped emotions in terms of tribalism. We have people now saying, I'm proper mountain person. We are being targeted, and it's unfortunate that's the case, because now we're going back to our tribal cocoons. Maybe sympathy votes. If this guy is gotten off the hook by stay orders from the court, what do you expect? The political dynamic trumps over the constitution, which is really not how it should be. Thank you very much for your time. We Kenyans know what is our problem. We just never want to take the medicine. And until the day we do so, we'll keep having the same problem, and we repeat this. But I repeat again, let's all go out there. Let's not look for a savior to solve our problem. We must all be hands on deck. Everybody has to participate in our different ways. We have different abilities and capacities. Let us contribute in what we have. If I'm able to read, I read to the people. If I'm able to marshal people together, let me do that. We cannot all assume that we can go to the streets and do the same thing. Everybody has a role to play, but let's not look for a messiah, because the problem that we find ourselves in, because the colonial system appointed political kingpins from different tribes and made them the barons that they are today. And that's where we find ourselves. Unless we stop waiting for a messiah and all of us go out there and do the right thing, we'll be here talking and talking and talking. Thank you very much. Eli, back to you, and let's end the space.
Thank you very much, Obed, and the rest of the team. Indeed, it has been a long one, but I must say very fruitful. I want to take the opportunity to personally thank our guest speakers, Dr. Weston Shilaho, Senior Lecturer, International Relations, that is at the University of Witwatersrand. And in English, that is Whitewater Beach, right? In Johannesburg. And Dr.
Eli, Witwatersrand.
Yes.
Witwatersrand.
Yeah, you know, that's Afrikaans, and I'm speaking in Netherlands or Dutch, so it's the same thing. You say wit, we say it wit. But thank you very much. I appreciate you, and we do appreciate for you connecting with us on the space. Dr. Ekuro Aukot, that is the party leader, Third Way Alliance Kenya. In absentia, we want to thank him for being here. And Professor Migaya Cage, Professor of Law, University of Nairobi. As always, a pleasure having him and the rest of the team here. And all of the speakers that made it to the platform tonight, we do appreciate you. And we don't take it for granted that you actually gave us time, ears, and even your bandwidth to share this very interesting conversation on the making of the Kenya Constitution 2010. Our conversation continues every single Sunday on the Sunday Schooling, and this Sunday we turn it a little bit lower from the very political conversation to much more about the church. And what are we talking about the church? That is the corporate church. We are told it's ISO certified, but we will be discussing the drunken master. Let's talk about that this coming Sunday. My name is Likiani Eli on behalf of Mizani 254. I want to wish you the very best. And right here in Mizani, where the scales of balance are restored and meaningful conversation. Very, very good evening. Welcome to the space. My name is Likiani Eli, and this is Mizani 254, where the scales of balance are restored and meaningful conversation do thrive. We welcome you to yet another great evening as we discuss matters of importance to this nation. We'll be hosting this conversation with my good friend and colleague, Obet Oriku, as we bring you very seasoned speakers and men and women who believe in the Constitution 2010. So the question that we are seeking to address tonight is the making of the Constitution. Many have discussed and said that the Constitution 2010 is a copy-paste of other jurisdiction. Is that a fact? We find out today, but in the meantime, let me welcome Obed to open the floor. Good evening, Obed. I hope you're doing well.
Good evening, Eli. Thank you. I hope everyone enjoyed the extended Mashujadi because it happened yesterday. And this one is a very important conversation, and I'm grateful to Dr. Ikuro Kot for agreeing to do this alongside with Westin and Professor Ketch. I wish to welcome everyone. This is a learning opportunity. We need to understand, we always say that we have the most progressive constitution. And I think we're so lucky to have within us, people who took time to go through the process and understand what it took to make this constitution, or midwifed it, and ensure that it became what it is today. So for me, it's a learning opportunity. I'll only probably ask questions for clarification, but I look forward to learning a lot more. And it is important to note that part of what has brought us here is because of we've had people who are senior counsel in this country misrepresenting and misinterpreting the Constitution, either intentionally or deliberately for their own informed reasons. But all the same, I wish to welcome everyone. Thank you, Dr. and thank you, Prof, for honoring this invitation. And let's listen to what you have. And I look forward to this. Thank you, Mizani. Back to you.
Indeed, Obed, we're looking forward to this talk. I want to welcome the real Joe to make his opening remarks. The real Joe, good evening.
Good evening, Mizani. Good evening, Obeds, and all the other listeners and speakers who have just joined us. I am really eager to have the conversation today. I'm so happy that we want to discuss our constitution, which is actually the supreme law of the land. And it is important to, like Daktari said in the previous space, to debunk a few issues surrounding the constitution and things like that. I am glad and eager to learn a lot. And one of those things that we've said a lot of times about our constitution, it is the most progressive in the continent. I wish to know how progressive it is. Thank you, Mezani. Back to you.
I like that, Joe. You talk about it being a very progressive document. And it was I think it's common knowledge that today one of the reasons we are having this big talk, it's because of the impeachment motion that has been happening. But that on the side, there also have been claims that the constitution is actually not responsive to today's need. There were people and political players who suggest we need to change the constitution in order to address our new realities. But we are happy to have a man and a gentleman who was part and parcel of the committee of experts that birthed this constitution. And I know there has been also conversation that it is not really what we had intended to come up with. There was some alteration that came into in between. And therefore, we ended up with a document that we could say a compromise document, but for the better of this country. I don't know if that's the situation. So this is what we're going to do tonight. All our three speakers have the first 10 minutes to make their initial submissions, but separated the first 2 minutes, they'll greet us and tell us about themselves for those who don't know them. And then the next 8 minutes, they'll spend it trying to expound and give us their view of this constitution before we can go to the nitty gritty of making of the Constitution 2010. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again. My name is Likuyani Eli, and this is Mizani 254. We start off with you, Daktari Ekuro Quote. Welcome to the conversation. I hope you're doing well.
Thanks, Eli, and thanks everyone for this opportunity. So I don't know. You said I need to introduce myself.
Well, looks like people don't know this son of the soil.